call to order. Okay, so I'm going to call to order the special meeting of the Simsbury Board of Selectmen, and the time is, that's wrong.
You brought one into the office.
Oh, I thought that was
You realized it was not working?
8 after.
9:09, okay? And we're here to discuss the Board of Selectmen goals. It's a goal setting discussion. I did want to clarify a few things up front. I did ask Maria yesterday, and her and Melissa are going to facilitate the process. But as the chair, I would like to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak. So if somebody goes on too long, I have the purview to move things along and get somebody else to have their voice here. One thing I would like to mention just for the viewing audience, we were originally going to not be videotaped, so we decided to make this a casual dress session. So we're all in jeans appropriately, or some of us are. And we will wear a mask when we're not eating, but we are pretty much 6 feet apart here, so I think we're okay. And we also are not planning to do the pledge today. We discussed that up ahead. It's a Saturday morning, it's a special meeting, so that's why we're not doing the pledge if anybody is interested. And I think that's all I wanted to say to kick it off and turn it over to Maria.
Thanks, Wendy. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming this morning. I think we've now done this 2 previous times, so it's still a relatively new tradition, but really looking forward to this today. I hope it's just a good, brainstorming session to help you all focus on, some high-level goals and priorities that are most important to you. Just in terms of providing some framework for today, we did include many of the materials that were in the tri-board packet, which does include the 2019-2021 term, the topic areas that were most important to the board, along with some more specific action items that the board was interested in seeing accomplished, and then a status update. One of the things that I'm really proud of, all of us as a team, the Board of Selectmen and staff working together, is that for most of the most recent terms, we were operating in the pandemic environment, so nothing was normal, and there were so many stressors and pressures on us as we were taking care of our community and taking care of our staff. But we still managed to, I think, make amazing progress on your list of goals and priorities. So just really, I think that's an acknowledgement and well done to all of you, and a well done to our staff for working so hard during the pandemic to still, provide quality services and still try to move forward and move some of those items that were important to you forward. So what we've done in sessions past, and hopefully this format will work okay for folks, is I thought we could take a sort of a quick look at each topic area as it exists, and even to see if there's still consensus if the topic area is important, and that we could try to take it topic by topic and work through items that may be of importance. But I also want to leave time at the end if there are new topic areas that are perhaps important to all of you that we haven't included in the past. And we may also find that there are some topic areas that we've made such good progress on, perhaps they're just not, they're not as much of a priority for us at the moment. So just, kicking off with financial management, I'd really like to just make a few introductory comments on this topic. This is probably, again, one of the areas I'm just most proud of when I think about where we were 4 years ago and where we've come. When we started this out 4 years ago, we had purchasing policies and procedures that hadn't been updated since 1992. We had a health insurance fund that was insolvent. We were not getting quarterly financial reports. We weren't even entering revenues in the general ledger until the end of the fiscal year. We hadn't done, capital project closeouts in 5 years, and that's something we should be doing routinely on an annual basis. Amy has just been an amazing asset for our organization. We've also made great strides with shared financial management services, as well as some other shared services with the Board of Ed. So again, I think this particular area, we have just grown in leaps and bounds. We're modernizing our technology and software. So again, this is an area I think we've made some very good progress. And I guess I would just kind of open it up for discussion, having your list in front of you of some of the things that were, again, important for for us to accomplish. I think we did accomplish most of those goals. Is this still a topic area that's important?
Yes.
And if so, what are maybe some specific goals or objectives you have in mind and might want, we're going to take turns writing and facilitating. And so maybe just, again, some general ideas, if you have some things in your mind that are important to you on this topic.
So just to be clear, this isn't necessarily a topic of keeping spending down. This is what happens behind the scenes to get us in position to make decisions, right, for everybody? This is not whether we want a 0% tax increase or otherwise, it's the sense of financial management. It's the software, the practices, the people, the policies behind it. So if folks at home are confused, this isn't whether we want a 0% tax increase or
Yeah, I would like to weigh in on that. So financial responsibility, financial management, I think that's something we all hear all the time from people. And what I was thinking we could talk about here too, at a kind of a higher level is, since this is driving the budget, correct? I mean, what we're doing here is gonna drive our budget, is, setting the expectation for how we spend money, and potentially look for any efficiencies that we can find this year. Given that we had the $1 million, we came in $1 million under, our expenditures were under budget. So, to me, if there's any room this year to look at ways we can find efficiencies as we do our operating budget in the coming term, or the coming budget season, if anybody.
And I would like adding to that.
Yep.
I agree. I also had with finding efficiencies, but also finding growth opportunities. Maybe looking at all of our town assets. We have a lot of buildings. Is there any way to monetize any of our assets? How can we find ways to grow as well? Because I think, especially in the time that we're in, spending and taxing is what it, I think that there could be some better ways through efficiencies and just being creative and thoughtful and finding ways to grow rather than just always taking the easy path of spending and taxing.
So I clarify, what are the goals that you guys are proposing?
Find efficiencies as we do the 2020, 22, 23 budget, as far as financially, to keep services that are required, but to see if there's any room for improvement in our services and cutting costs. Do you agree? Is that what you're thinking?
I agree with that, but also, actually looking at all of our assets in town, and are there any opportunities? I mean, all of our buildings cost money. Are there some that we do not use? Are there buildings that we could use in a different way that could potentially generate revenue?
All right, so those are two separate things.
Yeah,
They are.
So I'm looking at what Sean is saying. I agree with what Sean is saying. This is my perspective, which is this: we are talking about there are strategic goals, and then there are our annual responsibilities. That's the way I'm kind of breaking this down. I think we can collectively say, Wendy, that what your statement was, that for us to be looking for efficiencies and savings and ways to reduce the taxpayer, we should be doing that regardless. So I don't know that we need to make that a Board of Selectmen goal. I think a Board of Selectmen goal is something that, to me, is essentially either something new or something that hasn't yet been completed yet. So it's something new would be, in my mind, entering in Heather's idea. Can we look at ways to monetize town property? That's something that's a new goal, but overarching, I think the expectation from the taxpayers is that we look for efficiencies on a daily basis. We look for ways to reduce the tax burden and find alternative or better solutions to the way that we're approaching spending. I think that's kind of that should be. We could almost have a hard-coded, mission statement. Almost, to me, that's a bit separate. So that's how I would look at this.
Okay.
Chris, I would just like to say.
Shame on us if we're not looking every single day.
Does everybody know that we do that? And that's.
No, they don't pay attention, but I mean, we've been doing it for as long as I've been on this board. I mean, we spend the SAVE initiatives, we bought the streetlights and replaced the LED. I mean, that's not a new concept. If we want to codify it, that's fine, but again, that is our basic responsibility.
Well, then maybe it falls under communications, that we're not communicating well enough where we're finding savings and passing them along. So we could add that.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but before we go too far down that rabbit hole, so we do report on that annually. We do present that information to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. I believe it's usually in the late summer or fall timeframe where we kind of go through major, cost savings projects, findings. The Board of Finance does focus on that more, but we do always also include that in the Board of Selectmen packet. We've been doing that now for at least the last few years. So that's something I think we can continue.
We have the quarterly financial
Okay, so-
updates as well, which nobody asks any questions on.
So here's how I'll rephrase the ask, is, we came in $1 million under budget this year, and I'd like to make sure that we look at our budget this year, to make sure that we don't come in $1 million under budget, that we budget accordingly, so that we're not overtaxing, which, for the $1 million. I mean, that's how I saw it this year. I'm just gonna say that.
So
Right.
we can review that
So-
during the budget process, Linda, but that's not a.
But it is
strategic
to me,
goal.
it's a goal. I don't know if anybody else, I think it's a
So
goal.
that's a short term, this year we want to, this is supposed to step back and be a 2-year look of how we wanna run this board, not in
Okay.
6 weeks, we wanna not spend $1 million.
So this also said this drives how the budget process works and how Maria and her team set up the coming budget. As, that's what I read as also an output of this session, and that's why I'm presenting it here.
How about this, maybe this? Blending the two. Wendy's not gonna come off this. So did we get?
Well, do people agree? Sorry, Chris,
No,
as a
it's a
chair,
vague
do people
concept.
agree
It's a vague
that that's a realistic goal for the Board of Selectmen to push to, or for financial management to manage, not a zero-based budget, but to look at, because in the last 2 years, or the last year, we came in, I read that we said, you know, we keep all our services the same, and that's what the premise was going into the budget. So I'm saying, let's look to see if there's any improvements that can be made.
So have you looked at the 10-year trend with the finance directors?
I did not.
The $1 million is now an outlier on the 10-year
Yeah,
trend.
so there we go, hold on, so hold it there. So, maybe a
that's something
project
then.
might be, if we have continued years of being under budget, then the financial, a project may be, a takeaway may be, dig deeper into the numbers, those drivers, so year over year over year, is there something that 2 or 3 common buckets that come up under budget, and then, okay, so then, so how are we then addressing, what do we do with those? Are we misallocating, or are we overstating, whatever it is, not in the, it's not that we're doing it in a nefarious way, a bad way, but that would be, to me, the way to distill down what should be a standard concept that this board and the town does every single year, which is appropriately and responsibly financially manage the town.
Agreed.
And then, so then this would be an action item, look, this is a takeaway.
Action item is great.
So then, like Randy Gordon, have town staff try to identify why, are there commonalities in the year over year under budgeting where we can adjust?
I agree. I think if we are consistently coming in that far under budget, we need to take a look at why and understand if there are consistent drivers that are causing that. I also want to pick up on a point Wendy said about communication. I know that it says in here that, like, some of this is communicated during the budget process, and we do have the tax impact calculator. I think that this is an item that people care about all year long, and that perhaps we should think about communicating more consistently throughout the year about this, or providing this information in an easier, accessible way to people, because they don't want to just hear about it during the budget process. People, it could be something we could communicate more consistently all year.
I want to get to that underline.
okay.
Where's this communication gap coming from? Because again, we communicate more now than we ever have. We communicate on a quarterly basis. And respectfully, none of my peers ever ask any financial questions when those financial updates come in. The savings are presented by the finance director to us on a quarterly basis, where we are on a budgetary standpoint. They're presented on a monthly basis to the Board of Finance. The spend and save programs are authorized by us. So I'm really confused by this lack of communication, and that we communicate a substantial amount. People, our own board members don't seem to understand that. And then how is the best means of communication? Because me talking about the financials and asking questions about the sewer funder, everybody rolls their eyes. Nobody wants to have that conversation. And then we sit here in this meeting and talk about how we don't communicate.
Okay, I think that can I take
Well,
the
if you
floor?
want to take it.
Yeah, because I find that it's the public that doesn't have access to the budget. They have access to the budget. They can go out there and click on a link and drive down into a 300-page PDF to find data on the budget. So one of the items that I had in an email to Maria, we talked about, not Maria, to Amy, because I went to the CCM convention, and this guy was talking to me about online budget books that a lot of towns use, and I believe Simsbury had one at one point in time, where it's put into its, there's a, between our MUS, what is it, the MUS system, what's the name of the system? The Munis, thank you. Munis feeds into these online budget, ClearGov, and we had something else that we used. OpenGov, and you build you feed it. I'm the tech person, I can't come up with the word. And it's there, and it's visual, and it's out there for people to see. And Amy, I had said, oh, I'm gonna see this in person. And she said, during this budget process, we don't really have time to do that, but we can look at that, doing that in the future. So that kind of combines what Amber's saying, in that we have all our budget data. It's not easy for the public to go through it. It's not easy for us to go through it. So that maybe a goal for next budget season, is it a goal? To me, it's a goal, is to present a clearer view of the budget to our constituents.
So are you looking?
Is that what you were leading into?
Right, I mean, I think it's different information for different audiences. You know, the information that we get on the board or that the Board of Finance gets or is of course gonna be at a different level than, you know, what your average resident wants, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have as a goal providing information that's easily accessible and understandable to our residents.
So I think are you guys, I mean, what I'm starting to picture in my mind is you're looking for some quarterly or semi-annual flyer that goes out, that's 2 pages, it has like a, you know, it has shiny glossy pictures and graphs and the trends like this, and there's people walking.
No,
I don't know how much, I'm not in favor of any additional, we need to, for me, we need to focus on things that are moving this town forward and up experiencing people's, you know, this is all, for the 14 people who want to get into the finance of the town, the information is there, it's online, and I know we know we have a town staff that's taxed with time, and an additional reporting and an additional inputting to me is not the best. If it's already there and it's imperfect or it's not the way that we want to consume it, I don't know how far we have to push that versus other initiatives.
Okay, good point, but the other point I would like to make here is, we're not prioritizing yet, we're just putting ideas down on paper. So let's put the ideas down on paper, and then we're gonna get to prioritize them in the future and see where they fall among everything else that we have to do as a town. Agreed?
I do, but one final question though, is what are you asking for in terms of budget presentation so that I can prioritize this? Because the financials are disclosed, the discussions are had, so what median are you looking to change in communication? How do you want the budget presented differently that people can understand?
I'm asking for next budget season for our finance director to look into using a Munis linked up to a software like ClearGov or something that I think we even own, to feed the data into that system, which presents it in a way that's consumable by the general public, and have it out on our website. That's what I'm asking.
Okay, that clarifies it.
That's better.
Can we get the statistics on, I think it was 28 people that went to open government.
I was gonna say, I think it would be worthwhile to go back.
Yeah.
It was very active for a while, and I think we did pull the data at one point to see. Part of the challenge with what we're talking about right now is there's the communication side of it, but there's also the engagement side of it. So how, like to Chris's point, how many people are actually engaging with the system? And, you know, we put together the Citizens Guide to the Budget, which I think presents very nicely for people, sort of a better summary of what our proposed budget looks like, you know, around February or March. That's a nice piece. So we have the resource, how do we get people to engage with it, how do we get it to people, that kind of thing, so.
That's just a great point, Melissa.
So just for a structural point here, should we be going over what's already, I'm still not sure what we're doing. So should the goals that have already been on here be presented first to say, do we really, because we're going to be force ranking these like we do every year.
Exactly.
So they should be part of the conversation, I imagine, as well, to say, are they still?
Yeah, they
Are
done.
they still relevant?
Are they done, right?
Yes.
Right, like to demonstrate how tax dollars are distributed, show impact on median. Don't we do that every single year? So I don't think we need to actually have that on there anymore. As long as we're is it safe to say that if we say, we leave it on there, but do we have to leave it on there to say, so that we continue to do it? Or can we take it off with a statement that we will continue to do it? Or maybe you don't need to do it anymore, anymore at all, so that's why.
Or it falls under a bigger ticket item, like within a, we have the say we have 5 goals, it falls under one of the goals as part of that goal, not a specific call-out goal. So obviously that's something we're gonna do, we always do, and we're going to do, right? But I guess that's a good point, Chris, is there anything on here that we don't need to call out again?
Yeah, and I might be able to recap pretty well for you, thank you, Chris, because that's part of the exercise too, is sort of, what can we drop from the list? So, there are a few of these items, again, as Amy and Melissa and I as a team have had more time together, they've just become, and as we added Tom Fitzgerald as well, there are certain things that have just become part and routine with our budgeting practices on an annual basis now, to Chris's point that, we don't really probably need to highlight those because those are now just part of our good practices, such as, our long-range planning that we do. We update our financial benchmarking on an annual basis. We've already completed the revenue fund analysis. And in terms of demonstrating how tax dollars are distributed and showing the impact, I do that as part of my town manager's budget presentation. We do that during the budget workshop. We do that throughout budget development. We include that in the citizens budget guide. We then do a mailer to everybody's home before the budget referendum. So there are so many tri-board meetings.
So then how can we, if these are, how do we hold ourselves or you accountable that these continue to be maintained? I want to take them off the list because it's a waste to have them on there, just clogging up space.
Right.
So I can move on to something else, but then how do we say, so that.
So I like where you're going, because I was just thinking, do we have a good practices document to call it out of these things that we always do in the budget process? Is that something we have to put out there under the finance department? And that's even could be a goal, just to document our good practices for the public. Does that seem
Yeah, so, yes, but I think we just say, like, Maria, you will, we're tasking one of your, what do you call it? How do you evaluate somebody? What is the
Performance review. Performance,
So
whatever.
one of the, oh my God, I just wrote 4 of them yesterday. So that it gets put in there that we ensure that Maria is continuing to demonstrate how tax dollars are distributed, complete revenue, update financial benchmark, just put it like that, so there's accountability on someone's head rather than.
We just need to update the town manager's goals, because we have, it's the highest priority, prepare and submit operating budgets, et cetera, in accordance with our expectations on communication for transparency, et cetera, et cetera.
Doesn't, we're not saying that Maria does it, we're just saying that.
The
town
manager
Designates that these are done.
drives
They're
this.
community satisfied.
So it's really a town-wide good practices for financial management.
On the second one, we have not done anything as the first one from the 3 boards, BOS, and BOE, long-range capital planning yet. The town staff has, but we haven't re-engaged on the capital discussions.
Well, and that's interesting because Rob Pomeroy suggested that last year, that we start meeting quarterly or something to talk about capital items as a group.
Yep.
Because what happened this past year for those was, we had all these, well, I always think of it as the 6th year, because in essence, the 6th year now comes to fruition this year, what we had last year. So the items on the 6-year plan, and even the current plan, to look at evolving, because they change as the year goes on, and we just usually get them like at the budget time. So he had proposed doing just that, I think, as a group.
And that would be appropriate on the heels of the tech time, the completion of the tech time facilities study, our little dog and pony show throughout the properties. And then how are we following up on that, right? This would be a perfect thing to lead into, is to set a quarterly.
Don't say work, but you're gonna say work.
No,
It is a work.
an organization.
It is a work group.
Yeah, it is.
We used to have one.
And I did,
It was
I
222.
saw noticed that, I was looking, that we had a long-range planning group, but I don't know what happened to it.
The
Well, I
chairman
mean,
said the
it's-
board of finance changed.
Is Heather's idea about looking at how to potentially get more revenue out of some of these buildings and assets, is that incorporated in this facilities study, that concept?
I don't
No.
think so. I mean, the
No,
reality
that's in
is, I
there.
mean, I think we can look at, I don't disagree with it, but as far as the ability for us to monetize our buildings, I think that's pretty low on our ability to do so. Because we're talking about charging nonprofits and mom and dad groups to use
Well,
our
and maybe
buildings.
it's an
Not
idea.
necessarily, because there could be different uses for them. I mean, they're not used at all. That could be a potential sale that would generate tax
That's part of the
dollars.
master plan, you're right. That's part of the
um,
master plan study.
But also, I mean, so say, Hall has potential to be a wedding venue. That's not charging a nonprofit. Say, I mean, there's just, I think it's just worth taking a look at all of them just to see. And if
And
There
even
isn't
their
one
uses,
that can
it's not
come.
just monetizing, it's looking at the
Yes.
uses of the buildings. There could be potential revenue from some of those uses.
Don't disagree, but so what we're really saying here is that we need a consultant to go out and analyze this.
Well, we haven't decided the how yet,
I'm
we're
just
just saying,
saying,
yeah,
but
the
that's-
goal.
but
We
I-
haven't
It's an
decided,
idea.
it's a goal, it's a potential goal, and we're putting it on paper, which is a valid goal, especially even with this chamber wanting to do their community space rental. We have all these offices, right, in Eno, library, whatever, and so I think it's
It's a goal,
it's a
yes.
good goal to have up there.
Yes.
We can leave it at that for now, right?
I will just note on that point about our infrastructure, most of our buildings that are open to the public during the normal sort of workday business hours, they are just booked full.
Great.
Potentially maybe capacity for after hours, but while there may also then be a revenue stream, there is also an additional cost that will have to be weighed just
It's part of
because
it.
of, utilities.
You're always gonna run into, plus we have the union factor, you're always gonna run into the
It's not
building
impossible,
being
but we'll look at it.
held hostage by staffing issues, so that's always going to be something that plays into it.
We can look at it.
Yeah, and I think this, again, it does come on the value of the heels of continuing to keep the Tecton facility study in motion and fresh, and why do we go through it, and then what can we get out of it? So I think that's actually a good time for it.
The one item under financial management that's existing that I think would probably make sense to keep on here, just again, my recommendation to you all is just that continued partnership with the Board of Education and continuing to look for sharing services where we can. Again, this is an area we've made remarkable strides on, particularly in the last 2 years. I think I mentioned this at tri-board, we're sharing risk management services, didn't do that previously. My office is assisting, and we're sharing employee benefits services, weren't doing that previously. We're sharing finance. We just recently endeavored and did our energy procurement together. So, and we're continuing to look at other ways that we can share services. We're a leader in this space. It's not something being widely done throughout the state. I believe there are about 10 communities currently sharing finance departments. For me, this is again it's a great area because the community ultimately benefits by having, these improved quality services that are coordinated, better communication between the Board of Ed and town. It makes us partners as opposed to competing for resources, right? So this is an area that I know has been important to past boards. I think we've made great strides, but it's something we should be continually looking for opportunities in that regard. So if the board is still supportive of that direction, I know it's in my goals for the upcoming year. For me, out of the financial management goals, I think that's the one that probably still has the most relevance.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm very supportive of
I agree with that. Can I just propose that we actually put the goal is good, but we didn't do it. Engage in long-range planning consisting of a work group, of a subcommittee, of a something, just to clarify, because we haven't done it. And
Well,
we
let's
need to.
just, yeah, but do we know that that's the best way to go right now? To have a work group? Is that,
How else would we get the three boards together?
I don't know. I just,
I mean, we have to follow the rules.
We'll have to follow FOIA, right? And
Yeah.
there's a difference too, and I think there was some confusion with the Board of Finance when they brought this up previously. There's a difference between capital budgeting and long-range planning. Those really are different things. And what we were being asked to do was to essentially violate our own charter and start the capital budgeting process in July and do it completely
right.
separate of the operating budget, which
Right.
staff, myself, Board of Ed staff, we were not supportive of. But again, long-range planning is important. We are doing that at a staff level, right? It's important to engage our policy leaders in that. But I think that's where a lot of the confusion in the past year had come up is, right, capital budgeting versus long-range planning, different but related topics. And I think if we're focusing on the long-range planning, that makes a lot of sense
so
to get the
you're
policy
basically
boards together.
reintroduced what we had before the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put it on, good, let's
Yeah.
put on the goals.
And to your point, Wendy, you're frustrated with the 6-year plan, and you should be, right? Because that's where we're lacking, and that we don't have the long-range planning. And again, it's not that we're sending a capital plan to the Board of Finance as part of that, as Maria just said, but we're looking at things that are on the 5-year plan, but we're also looking at buildings, we're also looking at tax trends, we're also looking at cost changes, all the things that we talk about at the tri-board meeting that gets planned for ahead of time, and we have a line of sight on from the 3 boards, so that it's not a big shock when it comes to the tri-board meeting of we're down $1 million of revenue, we're up $1 million of revenue, or what's the 6-year plan say? Because that's all been discussed in a very transparent way, so that we all have a line of sight into what's coming. You know, things that we might talk about on our squadron line, right? It's a specific capital item, but it's a long-range thing that we need to deal with as a community. And then we look at the revenue side, we look at all the other alternatives. Again, we're not making decisions, but it primes the pump. So I think it does do what Rob talked about. It's just it's a broader focus.
I think it's good because I don't know if this is a goal, but just looking, instead of just looking at current year CIP, which I know we do as practice, but really looking seriously at the potential 6-year items, because we had to pull some out this year, like the day of, without any opening. So that would probably, to me, fall under good practices, that we look at, seriously look at what's out there for 6 years before.
That's where it would happen, because right now there's really no place for it, because there's not capacity in the timeline, and there's no group that has the capacity throughout the year to dedicate to it. And during the budget season, candidly, with the way town staff is working, 100 hours a week, years 2 through 6 just aren't a reality in the process for them. So that's where in July and August, there is capacity to have those conversations and get better estimates, get a better understanding, have those discussions about, no, we think the senior center's too far away, we want to move it up, so that when the town staff, community center, when the town staff gets into budgeting in January and February, they've already been informed of where our priorities have shifted. So it just, I think it helps facilitate a better conversation.
And just real quick on this conversation too, again, just because I know we have some new members here today, this again is an area where I think we've really grown in leaps and bounds. So in terms of, again, capital budgeting is a related topic. We were never budgeting on anything more than a 1-year snapshot for our capital items that are $250,000 and less prior to when we got here. And so it was always like, what are we going to do this year? What's the emergency? What's the emergency? What's the emergency, right? And that's not good for long-range planning. That's not good for capital budgeting, and it's certainly not good for our infrastructure. And what had happened is a lot of our basic needs were really starting to fall into disrepair. And so what we do now have in the budget, which is critical, is we are doing a 6-year plan for those smaller, dollared items that are $250,000 or less. So that's a lot of the pieces of equipment that are so critical to the everyday work we do, whether it's our cars, our lawnmowers, our computers, things of that nature. Our park superintendent, who's been here for 30 years, has recently said that he's been able to accomplish more in repairing our parks infrastructure in the last 3 years than he was able to do in the last 30. So I think it's that sort of thoughtful planning that's really important. Again, that we have made some pretty significant leaps and bounds in a relatively short period of time. But now that we've really sophisticated, I think, that capital budgeting process, and we also, for the first time ever, fully determined our baseline needs. So that was sort of that capital plan that Wendy referenced last year. That was a true picture of looking at our entire portfolio of buildings, parks, et cetera, equipment. We now finally have a true picture of what our baseline needs for our existing infrastructure. So now that we've really sophisticated our capital budgeting process, I think this does provide an opportunity for us to now get more sophisticated with our long-range planning.
I agree. It was the first time in 10 years I saw that.
Yeah,
So,
thanks.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have 2 more items for financial management.
This is usually a hardy topic.
Do you want to, I'll give the floor to you.
Before I'm the ball to go.
So, looking at the unique situation with the relief funding that we have, how do we spend that in a way that benefits the most residents? And are there any fungible budget items that it can be mapped to? Because that obviously will help take off of the burden of the budget. And I think regardless where we go with communicating, the budgets and things, I think in this unique situation with this amount of money, I do think we should have some sort of way of letting residents know, separate from the whole budget item of just, this is what we did with the $7.5 million.
So can I just weigh in on that, because I had that, thank you, on my list, is the ARPA, is basically how do we integrate that into our financial process this year and going forward, right? And that is a challenge of this ARPA work group, which we're working on, is how do we communicate that to the public, or get input from the public, and that's, we could have an ARPA topic, which is really, but it's a whole conversation that we do have a work group, but I'm trying to figure out what we can do to make that more, raise it up a level, so that's a great point.
What do you mean, raise it up a little?
It's just very, it's very informal, it's not
In
very,
your team?
our
It's
team,
informal?
yeah,
But I would assume that it is formal.
it's, I'm giving, actually, I don't wanna give my opinion. I think it needs some beefing up. We talked about like kind of rebooting how we're doing things in that group and make sure that, you know, what we discuss is available to the public, to get the public somewhat involved. We talked about doing a public hearing, how we, in bringing in legal considerations. So there's a few things that we haven't done.
So, yes, I'm not, I mean, have you ever heard of, is anybody hiring a consultant?
Yeah,
Consultants to pay, to say,
thank
the
you.
study can spend this money, and there's also a little liability component to that they signed off on it, they have some liability.
They're gonna have 50
We
bucks
brought that
of
up.
liability.
Yeah, okay,
We
well,
looked.
why
Other
don't
towns-
we,
other
let's
towns have-
let's craft that
Chris,
coverage.
Other towns have a consultant, but the
So-
problem is
So,
you're mean.
thank you. We brought that up at the last ARPA meeting because we're looking at doing a 501c program as a C3 501c.
It's a big deal to add the three.
Yeah, okay, so C3, as a kickoff, get some money out to the charities, nonprofits, with a grant program, okay? So we take a little step back because we want legal review on that, and how to get the town involved. But I went to the convention and the group that I was trying to model after was East Windsor, who used a consultant, to do that.
Success?
To success, great,
Okay.
but it was, we didn't agree to do that in the last meeting. It wasn't, people didn't feel that it was the right way to go, but
the people.
I'm going to bring that
Do you
back
wanna
up.
continue to volunteer your time additionally?
Exactly.
To find,
So respectfully, I don't think we're sharing the conversation fully here, in that a lot of what the consultant did, we have already done and town staff has already done, and I don't wanna pay somebody with Simsbury taxpayer dollars for work that's
It's not
already.
taxpayer dollars, it's ARPA money.
You can't use ARPA
Yes,
money.
you can,
Okay,
yes.
okay, it's
Sorry,
taxpayer
excuse me.
dollars, I still pay taxes for that money, it came from the
all right,
government.
okay, keep going.
It's
Okay.
ARPA
So
money.
Yeah.
it's not pennies from heaven, they're taxpayer dollars. And the consultant would get paid for the work that's already been done by Amy and Melissa and to some extent our commission. They would create the application, they would create the parameters.
Okay, so I think, to the, what I am in defense of you guys, because I got zero, you know, elasticity in my time, you know, and I think we're all to a certain extent there. So with respect to all the time that you guys put into this, what I don't wanna have happen is that we continue to circle around with nothing. What I mean is, you guys are continuing to try to find, because the townspeople are waiting for an answer. What can we do with that money? And all to this point, all I've heard, not because you guys are the ones saying no, but you're passing on the message, no, we can't use it for that, no, we can't use it for that, no, we can't, all we're hearing is no, 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 which is horrible for all of us, right? So what I'm thinking and asking is there a way to relieve you folks from the tunnel from which you're continuing to sort of travel down, trying to find opportunities to utilize the money? Is it relieve you by bringing another person in to say, this is the where it's been successful? You know, we saw this in Madison, Wisconsin, where they used it for whatever, or it's being used over here for this,
Right,
that,
I mean,
and
can the
that.
consultant have a
Yes.
broader picture on what the uses
That's all I'm
can be
hoping,
and what
because you
other
guys are-
municipalities have
I-
used it
You
for?
guys are forgetting the base, it doesn't matter what other municipalities actually use it for, it matters what's permissible based on our
wait.
financials here, which we've already been told by CCM, by lawyers, by Amy, we know what we can and can't use it on.
Okay, so,
I know, I'll just give,
So you're
I'll shut up
basically
here.
saying you already know everything there
No.
is to know about the
So-
ARPA money and how to spend it, and
No,
so
I-
you
No.
wouldn't benefit from engaging someone to help us make these decisions?
If you wanna spend 25 grand for someone to tell us that maybe we could use it on a different nonprofit, sure,
So-
we can do that, but the point is that.
But you don't know that,
Yeah, I agree with you.
You're assuming that we haven't done our job, and I'm assuming we have for the most part, and that's the difference here. But to your point, Chris,
Well,
it's to leave.
I object to you phrasing my comment that way. This isn't
Your
a
objection's noted,
this
but
isn't a referendum on you. This isn't meant to make you defensive about the work that you've done. This is simply saying, should we consider using a consultant like other municipalities have done
sure,
to, okay, so
sure.
Yes.
But you're not hearing my
So can
point,
I-
is that a lot of the consultant work has already been done by the town, so I'm confused on to what we would pay for. And to your point, we are about to go on a roadshow and communicate some of the yeses in the 501c3. So it's not, we haven't done nothing, Chris. I think
No,
the
no,
commission
actually,
has
Can
done
I-
I think you've done a ton.
Can I have the
But I'm
floor back?
clear, so to be clear, you guys have done a ton. Don't mix that you haven't done something with the fact that we haven't been able to find a
Well,
way
you've done
to
a
use
ton
it.
of work,
That's
honestly, I'll give you
two different
Okay,
things.
so here's what I'm gonna tell you, that I'm on the committee, and I don't think we're doing the best we can do on the committee. And I've asked Maria to, as a first selectman, to non-work group meeting to meet with her and staff that we've been involved with, Amy and Melissa, to just get some ideas from staff, to see what staff can support as we go forward on that, and to talk about what other avenues we may have, including a consultant, because I agree that this is bigger than a bread box, and we need legal involved, we need Amy involved. It would be good to have somebody with experience with this project, because it's $7.5 million. The point is, it is, ultimately it's taxpayer money, but it's not money that we knew we were getting, and it's $7.5 million that is not gonna impact the mill rate directly, and that we at one point didn't think we could spend all that money. So if we can use some of that money for a consultant, that would be money well spent. So I'm not saying that, I don't know if that's even is that a goal to have up there, or is that just further discussion on how to best use ARPA, whatever. But it's definitely should be on the table, I agree. And for the overall.
We should be patient with ourselves, because this is literally like a once in
Yes,
a
it is.
lifetime
That's
thing.
another
There's
thing.
no precedent for this. I don't even know
I
if
agree.
the consultants out there haven't
They're making
done
it
this
up as
before.
they
We don't
go.
know.
So I think we should be
Right.
kind to ourselves, because I think the work that you guys have done is actually, you've made progress. It may not
We have.
feel like it, but it's sort of like a chicken and the egg. Like, we need to make a decision, but it's hard to make a decision when we don't know, there's a world of
Well, it's the
possibilities.
January.
So it's sort of,
Tell them.
yeah.
Tell them about January, the final rule.
Yeah, the final guidance will be coming out in January. And to Melissa's point, I think you guys, again, don't be so hard on yourselves. I mean, we do have, you might remember back in June, we provided that list of, we're gonna have staff ideas,
Yes.
ideas from the chamber, ideas from the Main Street Partnership, and feedback from our EDC visits to our nonprofit community in terms of how might we be able to use this money in a way based on preliminary guidance. We had that, you might recall, yes, maybe, no list. And so we still have been adding to that yes, maybe, no list. So I think we do have, a good running list of ideas. And, I think one of the challenges that we have, communities of our size, where they're getting a little bit of flexibility, is on revenue loss during the pandemic. And as you guys know, we're in this highly unusual situation where the last 2 fiscal years have been our best new years of new growth in 20 plus years.
Right.
And we also had our best year of building permit revenue ever. So we're
So
such
can
an,
it all go like this?
I know,
But
it's
the point
such
is that's why we can't do
That's why
canoe
we-
docs and all the things that we read in the paper,
Exactly,
because
where
we don't
we-
qualify.
Yeah, some of this
So-
stuff is
So that's the
blue
challenge.
sky stuff people are saying they're doing. They
So
can't
I
do
We
just
it.
agree with that
wanna
as a committee,
I
but then
wanna
we come out and
rephrase-
say that we wanna spend, it's just,
So this could be.
it's really frustrating. We keep saying it's okay to go slow, but then we're not making any progress. So we need to make up our minds on whether we're doing this the right way or not, because I hear out of people's mouths both sides of this. We told the Board of Finance we were gonna do this methodically, and we were in no rush to spend this money because we wanted to make sure we did it right. Then we all get together and talk about how we need to go faster, and we don't like what we're doing, and we've made no progress, which,
I
again,
didn't
I
say
respectfully disagree. You worked your tail off.
I didn't say.
Correct, so that's, I want to clarify again, John, I hope you're hearing me. So first of all, let's, I think there's value in putting, because this is not something that's ongoing, it'll never be here again, right? So it could be a strategic
We have
project
2.5 years to do it.
to ensure that ARPA is,
Make
a priority of the board's like is ensure that ARPA is executed, whatever that is,
Right.
okay, to the, whatever it is. So my point is, John, you don't mix the fact that we can't come up with a yes with the fact that we haven't done anything. determining all the no's is because you've done something, and done a lot,
I agree with you.
okay?
I hear you.
So one of a sub-project might be, there's a disagreement, but it's just about this. Can we pay for a consultant out of ARPA, so therefore it's not coming out of Simsbury taxpayer dollars in a budgetary dollars, okay? So that's,
Yes.
okay,
As Marie said, yes.
is that would be something that would be attacked, that we could execute, not only just putting it up there, but that would be something we could actually act on, determining that. And that's like, so you start to cascade off of action items that are actionable, that's theoretical.
So should we have a sheet up here for ARPA?
That's a whole different work group thing, okay? I mean,
No, I'm saying like as a goal, is it a separate goal or is
We can
it?
include it within financial
Okay.
management.
Because it might be included in, yeah,
Other things
okay,
possibly
I
as
just
well.
wasn't
You go in
sure.
multiple categories.
But the shame of this, officer, is that the public is constantly bombarded by the media that this money is coming, you're going to be saved. So we're gonna have taxpayers, and I think because we're so close to it,
Right.
and we see it, we're being marketed and bombarded, but we're also in these meetings, and we're also talking to Sean, and we're talking to Wendy, and we're talking to Melissa, and we're like, shit, man, we're struggling, man. What can we do with this money? And our hands are tied, and that's a message that is incongruous with the message that the town, everybody's being fed by the media. And that's a difficult, we're gonna be in a
So maybe-
difficult position.
maybe we
So
should put out
communication
something.
is gonna be key.
I was just gonna say, maybe we put out some sort of press release
That's what
from
we
the
did in
board.
January, that's what we just talked about, the road show.
Oh, right, we did.
We've already thought of that.
But we don't have a timeline yet, we're waiting for Bob.
Can we just move on from this topic?
We
We're going
could.
round and round.
We
Sorry,
could.
if I could, I'm sorry, there were
If
just two
people
other.
want, anybody, yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, just for information, Chris, so there are a couple of communities that are using contractors to help administer certain programs. And that's something we had, brought up at an early level, at a staff level, is that, we don't have the capacity. Let's say, for example, we want to do some business recovery programs, if we want to do grants to some businesses that perhaps like the restaurant industry or the health club industry that really struggled. We just don't have the capacity to administer a grant program like that, and that's where we're seeing some communities like Windsor or East Windsor who have moved forward with some grant programs, and they're hiring a contractor to administer the programs. So I do think that that's definitely, as we move forward, something that could potentially add a lot of value, and we could use ARPA dollars to pay for the contractor to administer the program. So that's definitely something I know we have an interest in. And I also just want to quickly share that I do feel that we're in really good hands. For our newer members, Amy was an auditor for municipalities before she came onto the municipal side of things. And Bob, our town attorney, is also general counsel for the Capital Region Council of Governments, and they've asked him to do a lot of work on ARPA as well. So we have really good resources here, and Bob and Amy and Melissa. And so, we'll just keep working at it with you guys. But I understand that this will definitely be, a major area of focus for us for probably at least the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Well, I would just like to say, like, with regards to, you mentioned the grant program, I mean, having worked with a lot of different nonprofits, having something like that, I think would also be a way of communicating how the money can be spent. It's twofold. Not only are you having someone administer these grants, but it provides a framework, because there are so many organizations that are desperate for this money that it would allow you to clearly be able to see a process and what it can be used for and who can apply. So I think that also helps that community that is desperate for money better understand, what they can have, as opposed to if you didn't have a formal grant program, then it's like, where do you go to? Who do you talk to? If you're a nonprofit and you're trying to get this ARPA money, do you call me? Do you call someone on the Board of Selectmen? Do you call someone on Board of Finance? I mean, it can be a maze, so I think having a point coordinator like that can help a lot.
So I want to go back to Sean. He was, I stand corrected. We are moving forward on this application for the 501c3, right? And we were targeting January to push it out, right? But we're waiting
Exactly
for.
what you just said, Amber.
Yeah, we're waiting
Yeah.
for Bob D to do that. And that was where the question has also come up, can Amy right now is on tap to be the administrator of the program. And that's where we talked about a consultant, which is
Yeah.
what East Windsor did, they had
Yeah.
someone else. So that was the added value, not just writing the application, but administering the program. So that's another, just a thing in there.
I mean, Amy did say she has the capacity.
She said she has the capacity, but she did, unless we get 100 things, and then we're gonna, so that's still, but that is a very good point.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
one more thing I want to Sean, I wanted to just bring up Chris's point that Chris has made a few times, and you didn't bring up today. And I don't know if it fits here, but you brought up a few times about long-range planning for staffing plans.
Yep.
Is that something, or is that just a best practice?
I think that's the best, I think that's a, I think that's a best practice we should put as I would assume, that becomes a town manager performance objective, that we implement this and then we continue to manage it. Again, it shouldn't be something that, because, my ADD, the way I go back to this list is that these are actionable items that we accomplish and tick off, and that's practice-based.
Okay.
So maybe the initial one is, maybe for this year, it would be establish,
Good
Right.
practice.
and then
And that's
next year
ongoing.
it falls off,
Yeah.
because we've
Okay.
done.
Established good practice.
And I love that, and again, when I think about, yes, so again, for our new members, Melissa and I, our background as an MPA background, we are both management and budget analysts, and so we are very used to doing that type of thing that Chris talked about, and when we got here, we didn't even have a position control. We didn't have position tables. We couldn't just say like, oh, we have, X amount of FTEs, we had nothing. So again, in a short period of time, the salary, tables and position tables almost created are so detailed and so specific. And we've come so far, but really that next step again, and as we were talking earlier with capital budgeting, right, as we continue to really make our processes more sophisticated, that's the piece, Chris, that we haven't been able to do, but we're starting to work on. And yes, I completely agree and I'm enthusiastic about that. So thank you, Wendy, for bringing that up, and Chris for mentioning it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, usually financial management takes up about a third of our session every time because it is such an important topic. I think we've covered it well, unless folks feel like they want to keep digging in, but no. All right. Well, good work. And I know this one always really does take up a very large chunk of your time. So maintaining quality of life. We had on here last time supporting the work of the Spirit Council. And, I'm sorry, I'm looking at our chart that we provided, and there is one item that's out of order, which was under infrastructure. So I think under maintaining quality of life, we had supporting the work of the Spirit Council, but that was sort of the only actionable.
Researchability and great science, that's infrastructure.
Yes, that was one that actually ended up, sorry about that, we got printed in the wrong place.
Sure, because that is a quality, wasn't that
under
isn't that
quality
my
of life?
wayfinding soapbox?
Perhaps. I thought that one was under infrastructure, but I could just
It
be
might
looking
be.
at
I
the
think
table
it's
the
probably
wrong
both.
way.
It's probably both, honestly.
So
It's
maintaining
my
quality of
wayfinding
life, again,
soapbox.
sort of just a broad topic area. I know supporting the work of Spirit Council is very important to you all. It has been a high priority. If that's something you do want to keep, do you want to keep it under maintaining quality of life? Or look maybe even for a different topic area? Do you want to drop this topic area altogether?
So, can I speak? I don't want to take, if anybody wants to speak before me.
I got an item, but please.
I was gonna say, so I've been looking at that a little differently, and I think that, I was lumping together a few things: public safety, health, and well-being, which is maintaining quality of life. Now, I don't know if public safety is a separate item, or
That was actually on my list, that we should have a separate
for all three.
topic for public safety.
Okay.
Or if you want to call it public safety, health and.
I mean, because
Whatever,
everything
but-
can go into that bucket, which is
Yeah.
where I'm going is, because parks go in there, right? Like, so, and we have parks as a separate item. But the quality of life, well-being is for, health, especially health right now is a critical item.
Right. And I think public safety is definitely
Yes,
is something that we should always be considering.
yeah, I'm sure
And-
Sean would always consider.
And it should
Right,
be
yeah.
a topic. I mean, it's hard to believe there would not be a time when we would not want to have goals about that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a
it's
great point.
interesting.
Yeah, I
think-
agree with
sorry,
that.
go.
No, I agree that it should be its own separate topic because you would definitely have actionable goals.
Yes,
probably underneath.
agreed.
Yeah, and I think in the past, I mean, it's always been, I think, it's not that it's ignored, and I think for folks on this commission that might not be relatively new, public safety is always a top priority in this community, but it's part of what I think Chris articulated, it's our core service, it's one of the three big things we do, right? We provide schools, we make sure you're safe, and we provide the town services underneath. So it's not that it's not been here, but I do agree with you, we're gonna put it up here. I think there needs to be specific goals that are outside of keeping the public safe, outside of the community
I
police
think we
department.
have some probably.
So yeah, and I that's where I think it makes sense, especially with the car thefts, especially with the emphasis, especially with the ambulance conversations that we're having.
Right.
I think it's appropriate.
So are you gonna you wanna put up a sheet on the board for public, oh, you do, sorry. Oh, it's I didn't see it under there.
She was sneaky.
There it is, but it didn't give it its own sheet. Okay, well, I guess.
So if there's any specific goals under public safety, we can add them.
Yeah. Do you guys want
Under,
to focus on for public health?
Errol, you wanted to add something?
under quality of life, I would like to put supporting the Spirit Council back there. They are, I think, by far our most active town committee, and they do come to this board with, looking for resources. And they will have, at their next quarterly update, quite a robust update for us. They've been busy this summer and fall.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, we support the work of the Spirit Council, but that's very kind of a, the DEI aspects. It's very general, and I was just curious as to what specifics are going to happen under that committee. Because I don't know, I don't feel like, maybe because I don't do my homework enough right now.
I met with the chairs of the Spirit Council this week to try to flush out whether to make this item more specific. And they do have 4 work groups that are actively meeting. But my thought was keeping this higher level because there's frankly a lot of work going on. And I wouldn't know how to pin it down to a particular issue.
So how do we, I'm not trying to throw hand grenade
Yeah.
into that, with walk away from it. Again, thinking about actionable, like, things that these are big project based. So the Spirit Council has been established, it's been endorsed, and it's been repeatedly supported by us, and I think, as far as I think, it's been, in the number of different meetings, we've acted on initiatives or whichever. So how do we, as a board, keep this, how do we action on the Spirit Council? That's what I'm trying to understand, because the Spirit Council should be actioning itself, not us to them. So help me bring it out. That's what I'm missing the connection there. So how do we do that?
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
So how do
Chris, I'm
we're support I think the Spirit Council is on here.
It has its
been
own
on here
topic.
as its own topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it was established, it was funded, and it's been marketed. Okay, so therefore, absent continuing to say we're going to do those 3 things, how do we as a board action on the Spirit Council? They themselves should be executing the mission of the Spirit Council, not us.
I agree. Can I jump in? I think we invest and support the work of the Spirit Council because, again, we give them the public forum they need to get their message out. They need us to put in our budget the tax dollars, the expenditures that they need. So they've asked us for one expenditure. That's not the only one that they're ever going to ask for. So I think it's.
Now they become a budget item.
Yeah, well,
So then they're.
so I would counter with you, why don't we support the work of the Aging and Disability Commission up there too, right? Like,
Because we prioritize this as a
Well,
top priority for the board in the past.
right, we did, so I'm just saying, we can put it in, if someone wants it on the list, we can put it in the list, and then as we prioritize it, we see what rises to the top. But I'm going along with your point in that we're calling that out, that's the work of their commission, we support the work of their commission because they're a commission of ours.
Yeah, but-
So is Aging and Disability, so is OPE, right? They have good work to do, need funds, things like that. So yes, DEI is a big, whatever, global issue, but so, and I'm obviously you support all the efforts, but there are other efforts under some other commissions too. So I'm just playing, kind of going along with
Well,
what you
because I
said.
just think that if we continue to add, now it's part of the Spirit Council is baked into the budget now for all intents and purposes. So each year, we will, when they come to us, we will at that point, no?
We did a year-end transfer because the board of finance didn't want it, for anybody.
But I think it's part of the conversation now almost.
It is.
It's part of
It
the,
is.
you could just assume it's part of the conversation.
Yes.
So, and so it will be supported by us in that, and it'll be discussed whether we will continue to support it because of our monetary commitment. But if we don't, we could continue to add additional initiatives to this, to our strategic goal, the strategic plan, and basically never take them off. And that's what I'm fearful, that this continues just to stack and stack and stack and stack and stack.
I hear you.
That's what I'm worried about from a, so.
Well, I mean, I think also what you're trying to say is that the Spirit Council was initially put on here because it was a new committee and you know, it was all very new, and now it's ingrained as aging and disability and as these other things are. So does it fall off just because otherwise you have to add all of these other groups that are ingrained?
The reason why I'm suggesting we add this particular one, they are quite active. They are one of the few committees that we appoint that come to us looking for dollars for specific, reasons. And for those reasons, I wanted to, I think it was important to codify that this group and supporting their work is important to us.
Okay, so we could put up there, continue to, as a strategic initiative, continue to support the efforts and the intentions of the Spirit Council. But then
We're gonna weigh it in under the other.
it's forever then, that statement, that's not an actionable, I mean, that's, to me, it's not an actionable statement.
Let me give you an example of where it's actionable, Chris, is in where I do support this. We didn't put it on there just because it was new, we put it on there because we wanted this community to know that we were hyper-focused on this and we were holding town staff to a very high level of accountability. So we put it in Maria's goals, and conversely, she enforces it throughout her entire management organization. That's not something that we've ever done, but we could do with aging and disability or with Parks and Rec. We could do that, but we have chosen not to as a strategic priority. The actionable piece is when the budget comes around and we have to spend 25 grand between Committee X and the Spirit Council. If it's on this goal sheet, then the Spirit Council project should rank out higher. That's what we're saying here, is that when there's the same $25,000, that all things else being equal, we would rank out Spirit Council because it's one of our strategic priorities.
But
If we don't
Is that
feel that way,
right?
that's okay,
Yeah,
we can
I don't
take it
know if I
off,
feel
but
that
that's what we're doing to me by putting it on here.
But without knowing what another group comes asking for, how can we already know that that's the priority?
Because it's what our community is being focused on. So when town staff has to prioritize their time, they'll prioritize the work with the Spirit Council all over others. And it's not that the other commissions get ignored, but again, and I'm saying all things being equal, if an aging disability project has more merit than the Spirit Council, yes, we're going to support that over. But all things being equal, we would say Spirit wins, is what we're saying by
So
putting
do we-
it as a strategic priority.
Can I weigh in? So then do we broaden the goal to support the committees that benefit residents and or quality of life equally? I mean, is kind of what we're saying. We're not saying.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Let's go ahead.
I don't support them equally, and I'll say that publicly. And I'm not saying that, I think the work of the Spirit Council is so fundamental to being able to live in Simsbury.
So do we change it to I mean, is it whatever their goal is, if it's DEI, whatever, do we just state that as the goal versus just the committee, because then the goal applies wherever?
That's fair, Wendy. So,
I'm just
yeah.
saying, I don't know, what is their goal?
So it's more of what we have in Maria's goals, which is our vision for a diverse and inclusive community workforce through special projects, initiatives, and policies. That's specifically in Maria's special project goal.
So is that our goal, really?
Wendy, I like that suggestion, because then if aging disability does have a project that meets that goal, it can get their consideration.
I only mentioned that because I was on the committee. But
Again, yeah, I think that's the right way.
Is Spirit still coming quarterly to the Board of Selectmen to do updates?
Yes.
Because that's another sort of distinction there. I think there's no other committee that does that or group that comes for, I don't think, at that regular of a basis to provide an update on these initiatives specifically.
And I'm not, I mean, they're a DOJ group, like, that was established for a critical reason. So that critical reason still exists. We're not slighting, but the critical reason is really the focus, and they're the ones carrying out the objectives of that. So I guess it's just a matter of wording and focus for the group.
Yeah, I think that's good.
So just to clarify, quality of life, public health and well-being is kind of, to me, the wellness is really the subheading or the heading.
So maybe it replaces.
I mean, that, I don't want to be the only one to initiate that, but, right. Because quality of life, public health and well-being, like, well, then you can incorporate parks and rec in there too. So maybe we move parks and rec next, so that we look at them as a whole.
Just for the newer members, and really hiding myself in this, because even though I've been here for what, 5, 6 years, whatever this years of doing this.
Starting your
Yeah, 5th year, okay.
Yeah.
Is that, you know, from a functional standpoint, we have these headings, but then we have to attach actionable items to them. And that's where we get, I think we all have to come back to, as we throw these up there, what exactly are they? They're just not statements. They're not that's the way I'm looking at this, I've looked at this project. So when someone says public health and well-being, we better be prepared. It's gonna fall off unless we come up with something that's measurable as an action.
And we haven't gotten to those yet, but we I think
So
some
I'm
of
just
us
saying,
have a list.
remember, frame that, what you put up, with understanding that that's the next step of what
Yeah,
it
yes,
is.
so let's keep it as a double heading, right? I think that,
Yeah, and
for
just a
now.
little bit of background on this, and thinking maybe Sean and Chris and Eric were probably here. This really is one of the holdovers from the original term of the Board of Selectmen that did the first goal setting session. You might recall Chris Kelly, this is really important to him. And it's interesting how the focus has changed a little bit, because when this originally made it to the list, it was more around, we were going through the Tobacco Valley Solar Project, and we were in favor of decommissioning of our barns and Meadowwood, et cetera.
Yeah.
This was interestingly, it was more around open space and
town character.
agriculture and preserving barns, and so it's sort of, it's evolved, you know, this is definitely one of those areas that's evolved, so it might be very appropriate to perhaps, you know, maybe we say, okay, this isn't the focus area, maybe this is a more appropriate term for where we're now heading in that direction.
because there was no pandemic back then either.
There was no pandemic.
Right.
So I'll definitely make a note that maybe we just replace, you know,
Good.
replace that.
I think that it's assumed by the residents and our friends that maintain a quality of life, that's an assumed effort that's subconscious,
Yeah.
consciously done by every, I would hope, every aspect of town government and town employees. So it is, hopefully we can, you know, when we put that up there, what are we doing to say we're,
Okay, so let's talk about what we're
But
doing.
if everybody
to-
assumes we're doing it, it seems like it should be a bucket, right? Because we should always have action items probably under that.
Essentially,
Like,
everything would
or
fall
what,
under it.
you're thinking that like we
Yeah,
would
exactly.
say,
I'm gonna
we're
move
doing all the
on to
things we could do and
Can I
maybe.
do that?
yes? Yes, what was that?
Well, essentially, everything can fall under it, because financial management, if people can't
Sure,
afford
yeah.
things, then they don't have a good quality of life. If, you know,
Let's just put
if
this
your
together.
work environment, infrastructure, I mean, it all falls under quality of life at the end of the day.
I agree with that. I mean, the challenge for me, and the way I see this, Chris, I think the actionable comes in that this sets the strategic direction for what we then give 25 goals to the town manager from an actionable standpoint. So I'm not saying these aren't actionable, but to me, if it's not up there, then town staff and boards and commissions don't focus on it. They focus on something else that is up there. Because there's only so much bandwidth, and I think, again, this is where I debate with our friends on the Board of Finance. We run this government leaner than all of our peers, in my opinion, that we get compared to, both from a number of staff and a financial contribution per capita to what we
Absolutely.
invest in our staff. So I think it's really important that when we say one of these things, and staff is only gonna get 20 things done this year, outside of the normal, I gotta, you know, pay the bill or approve the time, they know without a doubt, this is what we want them focused on. That's, to me, it's really helped focus our conversation, our board submissions over the last 3.5, 4 years. It reminds us during the budget process what we should be spending money on. And if we disagree with it at budget time, then we ought to come back here and change it. Because again, you know, again, not to beat the horse, but in Spirit Council, if we don't want to fund the projects, then we shouldn't say it's a strategic priority of ours.
Right.
That's kind of how we've used it to really affirm for other boards and commissions that what we're going to do.
Heather would know this, I mean, from the library strategic planning that we did, we just went through a 5-year strategic plan and set up our goals, but the way that the director uses that is that when she reports monthly on the activities of the library, it fits under one of those topics, and then every month you are seeing, here's what we did, and here's how that furthered our strategic goal. And so it was a great working tool to be able to see.
Yeah.
And then as you reevaluated what those goals would be, you could change it and modify it, which we did. I mean, Heather can speak more to that, but.
Do we have a copy? Is that out there somewhere?
It is, yeah, it is,
You
yeah.
all did a
It's
great
just
job
been
with that.
completed.
It's really well done.
Oh, really? 'Cause
Well, it's also something that's been in existence before though.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
this is the second time
It's
we've
a,
seen it.
it's a,
But it's not dissimilar from what we're doing here.
I agree.
And if you use it as a working document, and
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, when you're making decisions, it should be fitting under one of these topics and.
I agree. It helps frame the message.
Wait, maybe a good time for
Yes,
a
I'm
restroom
right.
break?
Yeah.
And then a break.
John just, I took it.
Okay.
Maintaining quality of life, go ahead.
Focus, we left it really focusing on public health and well-being. Anything else new here, specific action items that people think we should add to the list for consideration?
I do. Can I, as the chair, I'm gonna go first. So, I know we have social services and mental health services, and I know that's being discussed, and there might even be a chance for ARPA funds, but the mental health hit to the community, teens, mostly teens, seniors, seems to be a real focus that we should be focused on. And under that too, mental health services, there's some, and even, well, that, I would tie it into public safety too, because another thing that I saw at the convention, was a community coordinator who was part of the PD, who was a police officer, but his job was to go out to, on calls that might be not, a 911 urgent call, but a call for somebody who needs, a community resource or something like that.
love it, the PD's gonna tell you they don't have the staff.
Well, but we have money from ARPA potentially.
Right, so we come back to the staff complement, as we know, we got our police commission document, so.
Well,
We also need
maybe,
to talk about the liability, because if we send someone out and you need a
I
police
like
officer
that, I don't wanna
there,
punch what you're saying.
I'm not, and I have no,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, it's
It's a
being
great idea.
done
It
in
is.
Enfield, which is where the guy was from. And there's people, I think there's research that could be done if that is something we move towards. But again, budget and all
Yeah.
that, we still haven't talked about, but it is, and yeah, go ahead.
We actually do have, one of our full-time officers is specifically dedicated to being the community services officer, and that person is
Okay.
not assigned to patrol, and they do a lot of those sorts of things. Working in partnership too with some of our other departments, and we do have a complex case that might involve mental health, and might also have code enforcement issues going on, and might also have animal control issues going on. And that community services officer has been an incredible resource for us in helping that team of folks to address some of our, more complex cases. And as I mentioned during tri-board, this is something that both myself and the superintendent are really seeing. And so Kristen, our director of social services, and our police chief and I are working on putting together a proposal for all of you that hopefully using ARPA funds, we would be able to have somebody who can go out and do follow-up after things like domestic violence calls and mental health crisis calls that the police goes to, as well as substance abuse calls, because that's a piece right now that we don't have the social work resources to do after the fact.
So on that, is that because we're adding a staff member to Kristen's team, or are we adding a staff member to the chief's team?
It would actually be the social services. Yeah, it would be focusing again more on that social service, kind of mental health, well-being aspect. It's really, that initial call, that initial crisis comes in, the PD is gonna get the phone call, but it's getting connected to those folks after the call, after the crisis, to help get them support and resources. And that's where the chief and Kristen are really seeing that there's a really strong need there right now, particularly given the pandemic.
So for something like that, can there be is there a dotted line between the PD and so,
They would
Chief
work-
and Kristen? So
Exactly,
that
that they
it's a
work very closely together.
Okay, and that's, I don't
Yeah.
get to know that answer there.
Yeah. Do you think this covers it, enough? Do you want me to
Well, so
mention?
what I would add, just trying to change, thinking about transitioning to an actionable item from that, we, at the tri-board meeting, I was talking about, asking about we were getting the stats about the increase in needs for mental health services through special education in town, so would that be then, and I don't think, Kristen, she didn't present that one, so But it would be, okay, so let's now measure, so now the meeting would be to measure what is our, you know, our calls for services or our whatever the metric is.
That's coming,
How much is it up,
yes.
and then how do we attach an action?
So use data, make sure we use data to, like, well, that's I want to say, that's a goal all across the board, is to use data to support all of our.
Data-driven decision.
Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
But that's part
Yeah,
of,
but-
yeah.
That should be an overarching
Excellent,
strategic
it's
plan.
coming.
Oh, it is, okay.
But to that end, Chris, do we want to put the I word in there, focus on increased, or focus on providing increased mental health services, or focus on providing mental services? Because it's going to signal what we want to do.
Well, we
From a
could
strategic
also
standpoint.
include something, we could also refer to it as a result of the pandemic, just to kind of quantify it, that it could be covered by our money, so we know that that's.
So that's the how, right? But what's the strategic goal? Is to maintain the level of servicing and just find different ways to deliver it, or to increase it?
Increase
We're talking about
service.
increase.
Yeah.
Increase based on the results of the pandemic.
Well, this goes to the whole concept of staffing.
It does.
Ultimately.
I mean-
I highly doubt that much of this is going to result in, not a conversation around a human error. So
It's gonna come down to financial, correct?
how you staff.
Everything is, but if there's a need, then if it's a need that's not being met, and it's a need of our taxpayers, then we have to figure out how to make that work, right?
That's what we do.
So,
And I think the need will be dual-fold in that we're going to have to look at it in here, but I think we're also going to have to look at it in the public safety line as well.
yes,
Because
public
they
safety,
do
yes,
go hand in hand.
yes.
100%.
We could put public safety next to these three over here too, and then have them all together. You wanna
I
do
think
that?
that might, yeah.
Be a good idea? Okay, so Melissa,
Okay. Public safety.
could move one of those fostering the engaged quality workforce over to that, is that okay with everybody? Because these are all kind of related, and then we can go from sheet to sheet if it is. Not that we don't want to follow the engaged workforce, we do.
I have I don't know if you want
Yeah.
other, I just have an issue that I wanna bring up, I don't know that there's an actionable item, but it's an issue that I've heard about that I wanna raise, because I think it fits with
Mhm.
quality of life and Parks and Rec is, you know, I've consistently heard from Tom Tyberski, and I'm sure Maria's heard this, about some of the issues with students, older students at Rotary Park,
Mhm.
and the ongoing issue of they're unsupervised, and especially on half days, they're over there, it's crowding out younger children that the park is meant for, to be able to use the space. We've had thousands of dollars of damage at the Performing Arts Center and at the park, and I know that it's been difficult to figure out how to address that, because I think, from talking to Tom, it sounds like park staff has tried to address it, and they don't really get anywhere with some of the students, especially older students that are just kind of like, you can't really do anything. They don't want to bring in police officers because they're trying not to look like, you know, you're over policing, and so it's an issue that I think a lot of residents are concerned about. It also raises the issue of, you know, why are there so many students that are unsupervised, especially on these half days? I know that, like, you know, we can't, you know, I'm not saying an action item should be to provide a program for that necessarily, but it just seems like it is kind of a problem that has developed that I think is on a lot of people's radar. It's costing us money, and it's difficult to figure out what the solution should be, but I think it's an issue that kind of touches on public safety, quality of life, and Parks and Rec.
Yeah, we had a debate on this, right? It's we just paid for new cameras down there, part of it, because
Right.
of this. It was brought up by Hensley and other folks on.
Which I think some of them have been damaged already.
The new
From
cameras?
talking to Tom, that they threw footballs at the cameras.
That was the old camera, I think.
Oh,
It
okay.
got broken right after that
Wow.
debate.
So I had, this is, clock being here, 5 minutes, Joe. So
Round clock, Bill.
I had this conversation because I've got children now, Amber, that once you hit 7th grade, the cool thing is, even they nibbling around the edges at like 5
Well, I
and
have
6.
8th graders.
Right, so not
I
even 5 and
get it.
6 are nibbling around the edges of the toilets. But once you hit 7th grade, you automatically have a passport that requires you to go downtown, to be validated, as far as it seems right now. And I know that you've seen it, get the whole issue where you can take it from the rampant crossing of Route 10 and the accidents that,
Right.
we're hearing from certain residents about crossing and new signs and all that, and
Yeah.
it's a conversation with the DOT, we have to address that. But I was having, conversations with my boys, it comes down to personal accountability, right? And I said, if I ever hear or catch you that you're in Rotary Park, you will pay. They know how that has. So because you have to be leaders, you are not followers. That is the mantra of the Peterson household. You're a leader, you're not a follower. And the interesting dynamic is that, by and large, there is a core group of smaller kids who are, a smaller group of core kids who are causing some of the bigger problems. Endemic. The group of younger kids is growing. I was talking to one of the officers the other day, and I was saying, he said, the ebb and flow of kids downtown, by numbers wise, has changed a little bit, but it's the behavior of the children that is changing versus 10 years ago. So when these darling kids were going, junior highs, they were going down, they're still doing work, but the pandemic has changed. But we've all known this, has changed the dynamic of people's behaviors to a certain extent. And in the police department, and I was having very, to your point, Amber, is that the police department, the police officer was saying, it's becoming more and more difficult for us to message to these kids because of how they're manifesting. There's something that's manifesting in them differently than they did 5 years ago, and we don't know what to do. We don't know how to confront it. And I was like, okay, so that's something new. So that's a new evolution of whatever. So
That might fit under like the need for more other support services to that group, right? I mean, if they are having, I see that in my children, that age group is having an especially difficult time processing everything that has happened in the last 2 years, and it hit them when their social connections were super important, and then those got taken away, and so it could be speaking to a need for some more mental health services, frankly, that are needed. I mean, I think that it's just something we need to consider.
I would say, did Heather?
So, I also have children, elementary, middle school, and high school. I think when you look at that, I even hear in the schools, you have 5th graders who are behaving like 3rd graders because they've been, just in terms of that social, emotional development that didn't necessarily come with teamwork and things from being out of school and remote learning. But, does that, I think by, however we look at it, if we're saying, oh, we need to do something to allocate downtown or something, I think, is that the right way to go about it? I mean, a lot of this comes from parents at home talking to their children, and, the social, emotional learning that the schools and the Board of Ed are already trying to address. And does that get fixed? Are we kind of duplicating something that the Board of Ed is already allocating funding to and that parents are also, needs to get addressed at home of how you behave in public, how you behave downtown. We're all a community, and we need to be respectful. Your children, when they go downtown, need to be respectful, good citizens, and they need to learn how to do that, and how to be respectful of a person with a small child, and how to be respectful of your elders. But, I don't know if that comes from a line item for the Board of Selectmen.
Well, I think that if we think that this problem is worse because of the pandemic, it seems like it would fit into the mental health and social work support that could be funded by the ARPA money. I don't know that the problem is so much worse now just because all of a sudden parents in Simsbury didn't teach their children respect. I think that it's endemic of what we have all lived through, and.
I'm not
so-
saying that our children are not being taught respect by their parents, they all are, nothing changed in that regard. But if this is a result, I just think when it comes to the kids and the effects from the pandemic with their social and emotional engagement and the mental health part of it, is that something that we connect with the Board of Ed with as well, because where are they allocating their resources and their funding they have towards this, and are we duplicating something that they're potentially already allocating resources to, and we already talked about the ARPA funding with, being willing to work with the Board of Ed to use potentially some of that for them, and this is a perfect case of that, but I think it's something that needs to tie in with them.
So that's a great, it's kind of, we've heard them wanting to ask for funds for this same sort of thing, so it's really, we would have to use our funds for the Board of Ed, so it's almost like a partnership, I think is what you're proposing with the Board of Ed on this social services role. And it may not be a permanent role, it may be a 3-year role that runs out when the ARPA money goes away, because then we don't leave it back to the taxpayers if it's no longer needed.
Or we decide it's okay, we fund it.
Or we fund it, yes, like the impact, we watch the data to see the impact to the community, right? But I do like the tie-in with the Board of Ed.
I think it will tie in with Board of Ed.
So I agree with everything you said, you gotta remember the foundational though, and this is maybe the fiscal reality of, if the parents aren't aware of what their children are doing to destroy town assets, they're not going to enroll them in additional mental services without some sort of connection, right? So there has to be an enforcement arm, or there has to be some sort of mechanism to identify the kids that are in need and the connection to the family to get them those services. Because just creating the program doesn't solve the problem, right? If the parents don't know that, Johnny is the challenge, Johnny never gets referred to the services. So there needs to be some, and I don't think the cameras are necessarily going to do that either. There has to be some sort of action from our board in terms of, and again, don't quote me, but do we close the park on half days? Do we put an officer down there on half days? Do we demand that the school resource officer be down there on half days? There has to be some sort of connection to identify the perpetrators / students in need of additional services and whatever program, because without that connection point, we're throwing money in the wind.
Well, and I want to just, I realize I wasn't clear, not just then, but so now that I go back over my statement on a couple of things. So what I've heard from the police is that, and from my own kids, is that the number of kids going downtown is large. It's not exponentially larger, but it's large enough that there's a different level of energy.
Yep.
Okay. What I heard from the police officers were that there are not more kids causing problems. There's the same number of kids, good kid to bad kid ratio that's always been there. The behavior of the bads is escalating. Okay, that's what is occurring.
Or the bad behavior is escalating.
So we're not going we don't have 100 more bad kids. It's that we're going to have 5 bad kids in every.
No, we don't have bad kids.
No, but I'm trying to make.
We have kids with bad behavior. I think we need to say that.
It's recorded.
So however imperfectly I said that, I think you understand the spirit of what I'm trying to say. I really don't care. So what I want to get at for what I heard from the officers were that the difficulty that they're having is because of the escalation in the bad behavior by the otherwise good kids.
By the kids.
It is something that they are previously would have been able to communicate, mitigate, and deal with. But something has occurred where it's now escalating past where they're comfortable, where they feel that they have success, they can make a difference. And that's a concern I have. So that's not necessarily, I'm not saying it's upskilling the police, but there's something that needs to be addressed to bring down the temperature to a certain
Provide additional support and increase accountability. Without the two going hand in hand in an appropriate response, you don't change behaviors, right? And I'm not suggesting you lock any teenagers or preteens up, but there needs to be a level of accountability. When I made a mistake as a kid, somebody would call my mom, and before I got home, she knew I did something downtown.
Were you at the Commons? That's where everybody used to go to the
No,
movies.
no, it's too far away.
Anybody remember that?
The
No,
Commons
probably
weren't done
not.
until I was in high school, but I was one of the kids that used to come downtown when I was a teenager, but we didn't do vandalism because we knew that there was an accountability factor at home.
Mhm.
So again, I'm not suggesting there's bad parents, but in the change of family dynamics and two working homes, in people on Zoom meetings constantly on the dynamics that have changed in this community, I think we need to provide support, again, to how do we transfer that level of accountability? Because, I'm not old enough, but back in my day, a police officer brought you home if you did something wrong. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There was no worry about what you posted on Facebook. If you did something wrong, you got your butt driven home in a cruiser and you were held accountable for it. So that doesn't mean kids were bad kids, but there was a level of accountability, and if you screwed up, somebody was paying attention.
I mean, everyone's
Yeah,
struggling.
if we could, just to kind of recap, because I think this is actually really, really great discussion, and it ties into, again, some of what Matt and I were talking about at Tri-Board, but right, I think what I'm hearing is that sort of categorizing this as outreach services and support to kids, especially with some of the behaviors we're seeing after school, it tends to be right middle school age, maybe early high school age, that the pandemic has changed behaviors, and to Chris's point, you might recall at Tri-Board, I just briefly mentioned some of the changes we are seeing. So our social services staffs our juvenile review board, and that does include some other members in our community. And the types of cases that they've seen recently, the intensity and severity of those cases has shifted dramatically, whereas previously it might be, maybe a young person did something, at school that was maybe just a really poor choice, but nothing, overly terrible. I don't want to downplay vaping. They had a lot of vaping cases prior to the pandemic. Without, breaking confidentiality of those cases, again, all I can share with you is that the intensity and severity has dramatically changed and shifted during the pandemic. Another example is we have a grant program. It's a long-standing grant program. It's our Youth Services Bureau grant. And one of the programs that we're able to provide is Family and Youth Therapy Program. And we've always done that by contracting generally with licensed clinical, social workers, or perhaps somebody who's a Psych D, to provide those services and resources. And we've seen some of our statistics quadruple for that program during the pandemic. And so much so that we had to bring on additional contractors to help us meet the demand that we're seeing. So part of that proposal that we're working on with the chief and with Kristen, in addition to that one person to help and focus more on those calls for service, would be a social worker to specifically focus using ARPA funding on youth services and the mental health and support services for our youth in the community. We will be partnering with the Board of Ed. I know Matt mentioned that as well, that they're looking for two folks. And again, so it really is going to be a partnership with the Board of Ed, but this is a very significant area of need from a staff perspective that we're just seeing every day. So I definitely think that I'm glad to hear you all talking about this, because this is something again that we're really seeing.
But to go back and address the downtown, back to Chris's point, what is a potential action item that we could put down to actually address that issue that is going on?
Does it get wrapped up in public safety? I don't know, but we know the police commission bubbled up some, I think. I don't know that there's. I think this is somewhat some of the police commission's requests are things that should be assumed or are ongoing that they're working towards. But an actionable item could be talking with the chief of the department to see if we've identified that we'd like to see. I'm just saying if that's what we'd like to see a police officer more routinely down there as part of their campaign to visibility. And I will say, Amber, that my boys love it when Officer Cushman's down there. He and then another officer, I forget who it is, they're not intimidated with him because just like your kids, they're mainstreamed to him or a police officer because of their experience at the schools. They're already mainstreamed. They love it when he goes down there and plays football with them. And that's like one of their highlights. So now, but we know that we have a staffing issue. We're always going to it's going to be brought back to the fact that we're down in complement and there's so much more paperwork to do than there was 25 years ago, and there's competing accreditation, and there's technology to upkeep, and all this stuff that the police department is dealing with now that they weren't dealing with 20 years ago. We'll always have that. So, is there a commitment under public safety, possibly an actionable item, is to follow, to get closer to the needs of the police department than we have in the past. I don't know, that's just an idea, it's a
And that's
statement, I
exactly the
don't
kind of
know.
thing we've talked about, internally with the chief. He said, the football game example is a great one. He brought that up. He said that was amazing. That gave them something to do. Everybody loved it, but then is the expectation that you're gonna have an officer down there every day playing football with them, and can we commit that resource? So.
But that goes along with the goal of the chief is community policing, right? So if that's his goal and that's the police commission's goal, that really should be our goal. And if there's a way that we can improve that, I think that is a good, add
We have to
to.
give them more officers.
We do. The other thing,
Yeah.
we also want a police therapy dog. We were trying to get that with the ARPA funding, and it fell through this year. But that is something I think is a really good priority, because it gives an identity to the town. Everybody is a dog lover. It's a warmth factor.
But I like dogs.
Yeah, you do.
I may be out of touch on this particular
My
item.
dog comes with.
I think it's a waste of money
Really?
A therapy dog?
for the police department. But I could be out of touch, and there may be data that.
See, that's just bigger,
No,
because
no,
you're
if you
you
have-
don't like animals.
If you have an officer that's responding, especially like you mentioned, there's an officer that responds
Yes.
in response to crisis situations,
With the
that
dog.
could really be invaluable for, I think, everyone can have their opinion, but I think that there are situations where that could really,
You don't have to convince me, I'm
Right.
out of touch on this issue.
Yeah, when I bring my dog to my office, like, it changes the entire perspective of the entire energy in there changes. I'm just saying. But,
You can't bring your dog to a traveler's office, it's against the law.
is it?
It's a violation of the health code, yes.
Oh, not mine. I should have known anyway. So, thank God for the travelers.
You can only bring service dogs into most buildings.
But that's a.
And we could use ARPA money. We were told, Amy said it qualifies for ARPA money. And the issue was we had somebody lined up, we were gonna bring it
Yeah.
forward, and the person could, because somebody on the police force owns the dog.
Correct, it's
And has to be
like-
paid to
yeah.
have the dog. And that fell through, but it can come up again next year, right? November or something.
But I guess that the one area that I will say that I have been remiss in is that I don't understand to the extent that I should, the challenges that the police department faces in providing services in town. And that's one of my own, so that's one of, I think that's making this statement, that's something that I would have personally in this next year, try to understand more about what their challenge, because I speak to officers all the time. I got an earful, a joyful earful yesterday at Starbucks for about 35 minutes from somebody who really cares, and is a person that is so committed to the town, but is, it's like a teacher is, or like Kristen is, or like some of Tom's team is, overwhelmed, so feeling unsatisfied and unfulfilled because they can't do their job. And I'm like, every time I see a police officer, I think they're doing their job. I don't know how they feel. So they're that's one of my things, is getting closer and understanding with it. So maybe action for me is having deeper discussions with the police department or the chief to say, what does the Simsbury Police Department look like in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years from the services it delivers, not just from a staffing complement.
I think it's a philosophical debate, and we had a pretty spirited one during the budget process, Chris, but I think there's plenty of data out there. Candidly, I think our peers in the past just don't like the budget number for the reality is a police officer costs almost 2+ times what almost every other staff costs.
members, yeah.
That's the challenge. I mean, we have the officer per 1,000 ratio. We have the fact that we haven't had a patrol officer driving around doing enforcement. We have over 600 calls a year for service, for traffic-related issues. We have 500 bear calls. We respond to every medical call. We have the data. I just candidly, we have not prioritized that in the past from a staffing standpoint because it's really, really expensive to do so. So we've decided that we're okay as prior boards, not this group, but prior boards have decided that 1.57 per 1,000 is acceptable, even though the averages are 1.8 to 2.1. We can debate where we should be in all that, but the reality is you know, we talk about staffing in the ambulance, we talk about minimum and maximum class sizes in the Board of Ed. They're imperfect ratios, but this community has put a stake in the ground that we will not have more than X numbers of students in a classroom, and they pay for it every year. And it costs us a lot of money to not go over those, and it's just acceptable. And we've put a stake in the ground that we're arguably understaffing our police department for the decade I've been on this board, even though we've tried to keep up, even though we're one of the few communities that's grown in population. We have data that clearly says we have more calls for mental health services. We have an increase in juvenile services. We have an increase in calls for action in the school. I mean, I think the police officers are at Henry James and the other schools for behavioral issues at least once a week. We have calls for service and noted vandalism down there, but the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance have chosen not to fund this. So we need to either take a different track and put our money where our mouth is in the budget, or we're going to continue to have the same results. And I agree with you, we've got to have this 5 and 10 year discussion, but that's almost like the long range planning. We need to address the hole in the wall today, or accept that that hole is going to be there. And it just frustrates me because again, not to go back on the debate, but we had very thin metrics on maintainers last year, and we funded a maintainer, but we've got 10 times the metrics for a police officer, and we said we didn't have enough data to make a decision on a police officer.
So I want to just compliment what you just said. So 2 years ago when we did the budget, again, there was no pandemic. Like, we have to look at, everything has changed, the world has changed, and public safety has become a critical item for all of us now. We're hearing it with the cars and the, what is it called, the smash and grabs.
The catalytic converters.
So, you know, all that kind of stuff has been going on around us. So it's evolved. So this might be the time to place more focus on public safety and our police department and commission, right? So I agree with you, Sean, on that. I think that is a really valid thing. I just want to weigh in one thing that I read. I did some Googling on other towns. One thing that, I don't know if it's, and again, I didn't read the whole public, I've been busy, I have not caught up on everything. I do know about the ask for people, but one of the things that some police departments are doing is they have a continuous recruitment program, so there's always people in the pipeline, because they said how hard it is to bring somebody up to speed, right? So is there something we can improve in that area?
Especially through the high school.
Oh, okay.
We should be career packing and that's a whole other conversation.
It is a topic.
To get it. So where I'm fighting you on that concept is about here versus, now versus near versus the future. First of all, it goes back to the, to the Board of Finance question the other night. What's the appropriate tax rate?
Yeah.
I have no opinion on that. My opinion doesn't matter. You need to meet the cost that you've set forward, the promises you set forward, to whatever that is. So what I fear though is that what I fear is that we set ourselves up for future costs. We have to think about the unintended costs in the future. So if we simply just add, and I don't mean to say that the negative inflection, but by saying simply, if we simply just fill the police department's complement, there is the unintended cost of those 4 bodies, or what I think it's 4 or 5?
6.
Okay. Okay, so down the road in the form of a pension that we're gonna be locked into because of unions and all that stuff, right? Which is a concern of mine, because it's a forever promise we have to make, right? So what I was thinking about is, in the light of how policing is done, what does the police department of the future look like 10, 20 years now? Because the police force of 1980, when I got thrown in the back of a cruiser and brought back home because screwing around in Town Forest Park with matches or whatever it was, that was different. That was probably a different way. They're going to deal with it differently today. Little Chris is not getting just run home to his dad to get whatever. It's a different process. Now, so my point is, if we add, Corey said, is that if we add the 6 people, are those 6 people going to be utilized? Are they, appropriately or necessarily in the future because of the way that the town is gonna be policing the future of policing.
So let me,
Okay, so that's all I'm asking about, it just, in that, and.
I agree, I'm not dismissing, I'm just saying we have today and tomorrow to think about it, and I think they're two separate conversations.
Just remember, tomorrow is going to be a forever promise for cost.
It is.
It's not reason not to fund it, but we will never lower taxes ever again.
so you need a strategy to go forward, but Maria wants to weigh in.
Yes, I'm really excited to share this with you all. So again, I think as we're thinking about, to your point, Chris, right, that long-term vision and thinking about how we change services, but also to Sean's point that there's a need. It's, again, thinking about creative solutions to the problems we have. And so some of the conversations that the chief and I have been having, and I think he's been having some of these conversations with the police commission as well, you know, is there an opportunity to use civilians to do some of the more administrative functions to free up the time of our sworn staff to get those people back on the road? So, you know, an example that he and I have been vetting and working on is the accreditation process, right? That's a very important process for us to be accredited by CLIA, right? It sets a very high standard for us. It ensures regular policy review of our practices, et cetera. Can we use a contractor to do that? Can we use a civilian staff member to do that? Absolutely. Right now, we have a patrol officer who is full-time, not on the road, and instead is working on this initiative. It does take about that many hours to really do that process and to do that well. But again, that's a good example of if we hire, you know, a civilian person or a contractor at a much lower cost, that frees up that person to get back out on the road. Another example to think about was we don't have a traffic engineer on staff. So Jeff Shea, our town engineer, does not have an engineer who really focuses on traffic issues. And we get so many, you know, concerns from residents about traffic. So right now, what we have is, again, patrol officers trying to do their best to track data, to set up, you know, speed signs, to do that analysis. But again, they're not traffic engineers. They're not trained in that field. But again, is that something, right, where if we had a traffic engineer on staff, again, a civilian person, so lower costs in terms of, you know, as Chris was saying, benefits, et cetera, you know, much lower cost to have a civilian staff member. Again, if our patrol officers aren't trying to do that work, that's, again, freeing up more of their time to be back on the road doing those things of patrol. So I think it's thinking strategically about how we use people and can we use civilians to then free up the folks that are on the road.
Your point is perfect, because if we just react to a number on a piece of paper, we're always going to be held hostage to that. So if it says the number of traffic calls has increased from 500 to 1,000, therefore I need another body to answer those. But if the reason for the traffic calls is because of an engineering issue or whatever could be solved for outside of just adding a police body, that's the intuitive way of looking forward. That's my concerns. I don't always want to be held hostage, you know, to just, the number drives the justification right now. If we don't do it, you're going to be held accountable.
I agree with you. That's why I'm not sitting here blindly supporting 6. But, and again, I think there's a hole today, and I don't think it's necessarily 6. And to your point of respecting the future, I think we need to do that as well. I think there's a number in between where there is a need for more uniformed officers to address things that only uniformed officers can do. And there is a need to be strategic, which is what you and Maria just said about where can we farm out activities that shouldn't be a uniformed officer, because we can candidly save 25 to 50% of the cost by doing it another way. I think both are embedded in the solution, Chris. We get stalled every year on the number, and to me, again, and I get frustrated, is we were told there's more grass to cut and that we needed to maintain more machines, and we funded somebody last year. And I think we need to be that willing to fund our public safety budgets as well.
As long as, and I agree, but that we need the data behind it
We have
to
the
see.
data.
So we need
We just don't
to
like
make
the
it
data.
public, to let the data come out for the needs on that. Do you want?
I think that's a great idea with the civilian initiative. I'm sure there's a lot of qualified, you know, civilians to fit that. And also to Sean's point, you know, with the need, you know, to potentially increase police services. When you look at, I mean, they mentioned in the report the amount they spend on overtime, and, you know, have we looked at what they're spending on overtime versus what that would cost even if you had one more police officers. So say you had one more police officer, how much is that alleviating overtime pay? That may, quite frankly, be the cost of a police officer.
Yeah,
So,
good
I
question.
can, yeah, I can address that a little bit, and I think we might have tackled this, so, addressing police overtime and how we budget for that, that was a focus for us, I think there might have been 2 or 3 budget cycles.
No, it was 2.
Maybe- Without now, I couldn't recall if Wendy was on the board when we had that conversation.
I think
It
you
was around
started
police
3.
overtime, so there is a little bit of, it's such a sort of a, again, a complex issue, and, so much of the police overtime is actually around backfilling shifts for people when they're on leave. So for example, because it is a job that needs to have coverage 24/7, if we have staff members who, let's say, need to take vacation leave, sick leave, et cetera, there are a certain number of overtime hours based on our current staffing levels that we just know that we're going to have to backfill for essentially leave. That's actually the bulk of our overtime. Then there's sort of another bucket of overtime, that's when officers get held over. So let's say their shift is scheduled to end at 3, but they get sent out on a call at 2:45 and they don't wrap up until 3:30. So I would say, you know, those sort of holdovers for calls that they're responding to on their shift, as well as the backfilling, is actually the bulk of our overtime. We do also have overtime for training purposes, but we do track that separately. So that's the bulk of the overtime. So I think, unfortunately, in the past, I had heard, at least here, that was sort of a justification. Oh, adding more officers is going to reduce overtime. I'm just being really candid with you guys. That's generally just, it's just generally not the case. And again, I'm sorry for like the folks who have heard this a little bit before, and the chief did put together some numbers and statistics for us a few years ago that kind of demonstrate again, that backfilling of shifts, but again, if that's something that the board would like to revisit, we could absolutely, you know, refresh that work for you guys.
So the way to make Heather's point work though is if you have a minimum staffing of 3 on the overnight, but we staff 4,
Correct.
because we hire more officers, and then if number 4 calls out, we don't bring someone in to back them up, so we still have 3 on the overnight. So we try to, but you need more officers, so that's the way to make it work. If you only go with the minimum staffings and that's who you schedule, you're always gonna have this problem. So if we overstaff a shift,
Right.
but we have, so that's when we invest in officers to make that lower, right?
Yes.
So,
that's
so I
correct.
just want to call out too, that was a question I asked, I'm sure somebody else asked last year, was when we did not, the police asked for 3 positions, we didn't have any, it came up in one of our budget meetings to propose adding on, and we were still three men down, like we had 3 open positions that were yet to be filled, so to add we didn't want to add another full-time one to the budget at the time. And the other question that came up, I'll take credit for it, but I think others asked, was would it get rid of the overtime? And the answer was no. So and if I just read this here, that overtime is not solely a function of staffing. But what you're saying, it sounds like, is there a way to make it incorporated into the function of staffing to reduce the $275,000 that's being asked for here? Because to add 6 people and to increase the overtime budget doesn't seem logical that that's what's happened, that should be happening. So is that?
I think it's part of, it's threefold. It's if you increase the staffing beyond, and then schedule them beyond the minimum shift requirements, you can then lower the overtime budget.
Okay, because I'm just saying, when I read the police commission report, it just says it should be increased, and it's not solely a function of staffing.
I think we could talk
But we
to them
should
about
say
that.
it needs to be a function of staffing if we're going to increase staffing, right? Because we're
That-
gonna
yeah.
save $275,000.
That
But the
would
whole
be-
pension and all that long,
Yeah, it is.
Unintended long-term.
What's
yeah, it is a
getting
lot of long-term costs.
What's getting lost here maybe and might help with the presentations is the minimum staffing numbers during the shifts of who's actually on when and what that looks like. Because whatever, is it 3 or 4 on the overnight plus a sergeant, you know, so those are the minimum numbers. So if those numbers have to be hit per the requirements that are set. And that's, so when those 1 or 2 people are out on vacation or sick or, you know, life happens like the rest of us, that's where the overtime number is just baked, as Maria is articulating. So again, if we fund another police officer and we direct the commission, which we've got to see if we can do that or not, because they have a lot of authority over scheduling, to put that on the overnight with the idea that that would then reduce their overtime budget. That's a conversation we can have.
Yeah, same with training, because training, sometimes it falls into overtime. Why is training overtime if somebody why wouldn't you do it during, like, I don't know.
It's not gonna be a one-to-one savings out of the gate.
Okay.
It's more of a complicated staffing conversation, but one
Yeah,
that I think we
no, I
can have.
agree, I
Yes.
agree.
And just quickly, that question on training, so oftentimes, most training opportunities, the trainers themselves, usually will be sort of daytime hours, and right, again, we have officers who always work second shift, we have officers who always work third shift. So oftentimes where the training overtime is incurred is like, let's say we have an officer who's on third shift, we're going to need to keep them on third shift, keep them on their routine shift, and then they have to come in on, say, like a day that they have off, or essentially work a double in order to get the training at a time when the trainer is available. So usually I would say probably about the training costs are associated with second or third shift.
Gotcha, got it, okay, good point. Okay, so, should we move to another,
Yeah, just maybe just real quick, anything left
Yeah,
under
yeah.
public health and well-being, initial thoughts, or since we are also having a really healthy conversation around public safety, just anything else on public safety for action items or public health and well-being before we move to?
Public safety, yes. Here's a grenade, now this is gonna go over a lead balloon, but.
Ready.
I think we need, I'd like us to take a look at ambulance. That we need to understand really what is the viability of that organization. And I know Joan loves that topic. And also, I know we're going to get an update on Thursday, we're working hard on, but the cell phone issue is public safety. So those two
The
things.
ambulance one, there's a lot of information, I won't do it now, but there's a ton there, and you're right, I think we should continue to have an appropriate partnership with the ambulance.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that we continue to the ambulance seems to be on a merry-go-round of, and do we really understand, do we need to make, other than just sort of getting the report and sort of nodding our heads, do we need to make a statement on
So
the
there's more than
viability
just
of the ambulance?
There's more than just a report coming, but yes, so, and it's, again, I know, we can go through it if you want, but it's more complicated in that, and I don't mean this, we're not going to fire a Simsbury ambulance, but we also don't have the authority to just unilaterally fire Simsbury ambulance and bring someone else in. There's an agreement that basically supersedes us, that it's controlled by state statute. Maria can explain it better, but they essentially hold the right to be our ambulance service. And we gave them that right decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
In order to eliminate them from having that right, we would have to show cause for basically dereliction of their service, of pretty substantial degradation in service, and go to the state and petition the state to remove them as our provider. So this body can't unilaterally decide to bring in AMR if we wanted to, which is something we learned through this process, which is news to a lot of us as we went through this, and I credit Maria and staff for really digging into it. That doesn't mean, though, that we can't further connect the services, and we are looking, absolutely, Chris, at the viability. We're exploring actually a partnership in terms of their openness, and I owe their board a call in terms of one of us being on their board of directors, potentially the chair of public safety or the first select person or somebody, to provide additional transparency to the public, because right now their meetings aren't open and legally they don't have to be.
Yeah. So I opened it up, you can close it. I always want to say, because I am a full supporter of the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association. They contribute to my family's health and well-being for decades.
Yep.
And they will continue. But my point is, for me, again, something like my statement about this is not for you guys today, but for me, I seem to observe the Volunteer Ambulance Association continue to come around as a flashpoint for somebody, and I'm like, why don't we understand what is? So thank you. You're saying that it falls on my shoulders to go out there and find that information that may be in existence.
No, we
to
need to
better
share. I need to
understand.
share with you.
Okay.
We just haven't had a chance to do that yet, and that's part of what's coming Thursday, Chris, and the ongoing.
Yeah, all I was going to say is that Sean, Maria, and I, and some engaged residents have been meeting somewhat regularly since the late summer on this issue, and we've learned a lot.
So, when will we get a report on that for the whole board?
So I was going to do it at public safety, and then I would be happy to do it again for the board.
Okay, are you going to do it, not this coming public safety, because we're.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it's-
great, so Thursday will be a
But
lot of
if folks
information.
don't want to turn, that's fine, we can do it again for the board.
Yeah,
It's-
well, it'd be
I've
good
pretty
to-
much got it committed to memory at this point.
If we could listen in, that'd be great.
Yeah, and again, in terms of, an action item, this is helpful discussion, and maybe Melissa and I can kind of think on it. But, perhaps some sort of overview at a future meeting. And occasionally, right, we want presentations that are a little, more lengthy. For example, the facilities master plan, right, that's such an important topic. And, perhaps just, again, especially again, we have so many new members, but perhaps, a presentation about what exactly the Ambulance Association provides, their relationship with the town, what we do and don't have control over, because I think that's often something where a lot of our residents get very confused. They just assume that they are part of the town, and in some towns, that's the way it works. So, for example, my last community, my fire department, that was part of the town, that wasn't a separate entity, they were also the ambulance provider, not for paramedic level service, but for EMT service. So that was something that did fall within our purview. I had direct, supervisory control over that function of government. So it does vary town by town, and I do think from time to time that is something that really does cause a lot of confusion for our residents. So perhaps we can think about, an education opportunity, again, just not only really for you all, but to help educate, the wider public about what services they provide, how it's provided, and what our role is in that. That might be very helpful.
Why don't we do the public safety update on Thursday, and then I can ask you to put something on the agenda in perhaps January
Okay.
to follow up and do that higher level of education, because I think Thursday we'll touch on what I just said, but it's going to primarily focus on the 2 ambulance response that's been going on since the summer and the metrics and the results that have changed as a result of it, which was our primary search and learn mission there, and we've learned a lot of result as a result of this. And I think it will empower you as a board member and other folks to be in the position to explain to residents. This is a tough conversation. It's hard to explain. There's a lot of nuances to it. There's a lot of statutes to it. But it's an important one to make sure that I'm not deflecting accountability. We're absolutely, I think, holding the ambulance service to a high level of accountability, and they don't have a problem with it, by the way. They've been very good partners with us here. But how does it all work? And then we need to have a conversation again about what does this community expect from a level of service, much like the police department level of service. And if we're happy with it, we continue to go on. If we're not happy with it, then we have a financial conversation or a structural conversation about what our options are.
I have a couple of thoughts quickly, sorry, just to that point about, educating ourselves in the community. Before the pandemic, we started having the health district come, I think in January, to do like an annual update to the board, just because they are technically our health district, although they're not a town department. And I think that had been helpful. It was in advance of the budget cycle. Is that something potentially that would be helpful for the ambulance to do?
Yeah, that would be great.
And then the second thought I had, just hearing Sean talk about sort of the board structure there and potentially having representation, do you want to keep this on as maybe something around governance? Is that something you want to consider talking about in terms of the governance structure, or is that not really appropriate for?
So we don't have a say in their governance structure per se, and I think it's a respectful ask. They would need to agree as an independent nonprofit to add a town representative. And then we would obviously talk about who we would recommend as a board. Whether it be a member of town staff or it be one of us. I know the initial thought was whoever the chairperson of public safety
Who could that be?
or the first select person. Either way.
Yeah.
Again, are they a voting member? Are they not? There's a lot of ways to go with it.
Yep.
I don't know. I'm not in a position to dictate to them.
Yep.
But
See
certainly
what they're open to.
an important community conversation.
It is.
So.
That's a great idea. Okay, so,
All right, anything else on public safety or public health before we move on?
well,
We have 5 bars in town hall, which means the cell phone service is getting better.
yeah, so,
First time ever.
I have a list of items. So, this is where the public safety, health, and well-being cross into Parks and Rec. I think we can come back to these topics, right? Well, I'm just saying, like, some things may end up falling back under a different topic. And I know that I've had an interest in this and been in conversations, and Heather's asked, and I'm sure others have, but the whole bike trail connection.
Can I actually table that for a second?
Yeah.
Just knocking something off that's under maintaining quality of life from our old list.
Oh, yeah.
Going back to the existing list. So, research ability to upgrade signage on state roads. So, that was a
Was that
previous
done?
one.
Yeah, was it done?
So, either we maintain,
Is it completed, right?
either
Is
we
what you're saying?
cycle it or we knock it off.
I think that was misplaced. It should have been on our infrastructure. Right?
Yeah, I do believe that should, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the lines, I think that should have been under infrastructure, I'm not quite sure how it ended up there, unless, I'll have to double check.
But is that all is Spirit Council all we had under quality of life?
I'll go back and double check, it's possible that for whatever reason we may have put up the signs under quality of life, and maybe for the visual aesthetic, but all that being said, you know, we did have.
Okay, we can come back to it,
Yeah, but-
you can just find it, please, just didn't wanna leave maintaining quality, if that was actually there, it sounds like it wasn't, so it's probably under infrastructure, we can just.
It was somewhere.
Okay.
It was my sermon on
But it
wayfinding.
wasn't
We funded through the year-end
Yeah,
transfers.
but I think we could address it now, Chris, because, you know, again, this is something that, at a local level, we have very little control over. We did have staff, you know, research this a bit, but the sign replacement is the responsibility of the DOT. It's very unlikely that they're going to do that unless we pay for the infrastructure. You know, where I think we have had some success, and it's reported in here, is more on local roads. So on local roads, we have more direct control. I think we've made some great progress, particularly in regards to some of our trail crossing and road crossing upgrades on local roads. But again, on state roads, it's more difficult, right? It's an ask, and oftentimes the DOT will say, well, no, it doesn't meet our standards. An example actually is, you know, the West Street mid-block crossing I've sometimes heard about. You know, we've brought that to the DOT in the past. They said it doesn't meet our standards or our criteria. We're not going to do that. We're not going to fund it. Hey, town, if you want to fund it, maybe we'll consider it. Sometimes they've outright said that they wouldn't. So again, just in terms of the ability we have to influence those decisions on state roads versus local roads does vary drastically. So this may be one of those items, to Chris's point, that, you know, we've looked into it. I think we've, you know, done the best we can with the state roads. On local roads, I think, right, it's part of our practice now, and we're working on that, and that's just becoming part of our routine program. So perhaps this is an item we mark as done, or an action item that we move off the list.
Well, can I just have a question related to that? So, this kind of goes with the public safety side of the road signage and the thing, right? Like, if you go down our side streets, we have the blinking lights on the crosswalks. But when you come to a state road right out front here, it just has the light. There's no light.
We do have the blinking light on a state road, way up the south end of town, where the agway is.
Yep.
Okay, yes, that's it, right, but, so I don't know if that falls into making that happen, because it's definitely a lower level of safety when it doesn't have that here. And I guess the state's not paying for it out front, is that the issue? Not to delve into something.
Yeah, sure. So again, and we've had conversations with them about the crossings in front of town hall. Again, on state roads, oftentimes if we have a concern at the local level, we'll bring it to the state. Some of the challenges that we have is that they have, you know, criteria, guidelines, etc. And if our ask does not meet those standards, essentially, sometimes it's just a hard no, even if you fund it, like we're just not willing to consider it. Other times, you know, there may be a conversation of, well, if you're willing to fund it, we might be open to it. So for example, you might recall that we want to do improvements to town hall parking lot as well as the entrance, relocating the entrance, which would then consist of relocating the crosswalk. But the project that was initiated before I got here, and it wasn't funded at a proper level. So you might recall in the upcoming CIP, you know, we had recommended another tranche of money so we could actually move forward with that project. So we have done a lot of design work, planning work, and the DOT has indicated a willingness to let us put an upgraded crosswalk on the state road if we pay for it, if we agree to maintain it, but they will not agree to it unless there is a realignment of our entrance and exit and some other requirements. So again, I know it probably is a long answer to this question, but it depends. And again, with state roads, we have to do our best to work with them, but oftentimes they'll also be looking for a town commitment to not only pay for the infrastructure, but then to maintain the infrastructure in perpetuity.
So do we want to improve the quality of safety in front of town hall on state road to the best of our ability is really the question for the strategic goal.
Explore options.
Explore options to improve, yeah. Because we funded this 5 years ago at a number we were told would get the parking lot done.
And there was no design work done at the time, so I'm not sure. Again,
I funded this once already. This is really frustrating because I was told by the town engineer and the first select person at the time that it was enough money to do it. And then
So you funded the exploration.
Funded the realignment of. We were told that the capital improvement project that was approved that year of the budget would fund the realignment of this.
So then was it pulled off because we couldn't afford it, or was it an outlier,
I don't know the reason
typical
for why it
games we
didn't
work?
work, but.
Sure, but I can quickly share. And again, it does predate me. I think it might have also predated Jeff. But
I
the
think
amount.
it did, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely predated me. The amount that was budgeted, it was unfortunately budgeted, this is not how we do capital project work now, but it was put into the budget without any design work, or official cost estimates being prepared, and it's only about half of what it costs to actually realign everything. So that tranche of money that's like coming up, would
So there's money saved.
enable us to be able to fully and properly do the project.
Oh, there's already allocated?
Yeah, there's
Very,
one.
very small amount, it's about,
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna do, I mean, if you just, no, I guess I am knocking the state, but, yeah, I don't, it's gonna cost money, I don't want some inelegant, big municipal answer to drop in front of town hall, right, that's gonna be okay.
Visually, all it is realigning the parking lot with the post office.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is if we stand here and beat the drum and said, state, come in here, we've got a traffic issue, safety issue with children, which is then the flashpoint, they do it, they come in, they put it, it's inelegant, you know, so that's my kind
Looks
of
crappy.
concern, you know, so that's,
yeah.
so I guess my point is, that's why I'm asking, should we explore the options of what they are to alter the crosswalk or upwalk it, you know, up experiencing or something.
Yeah, well, I think I'm hearing from you all, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's less about, or again, I think this previously was more about the aesthetics of state signage. What I'm hearing more is a focus of energy towards the safety of our crossings on both state and local roads.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Okay,
And-
perfect.
and-
I think maybe public safety?
My preference wouldn't be to call out a specific intersection, because we hear about a lot of intersections. that are
Right.
meaningful to people.
Yeah, that was actually gonna be my point, because I've heard a lot about
Yeah,
the issue between the library and Fitzgerald's.
yeah,
And you're supposed to go all the way down
Or First
by
Church.
First Church and then come back up, and especially when you have all the youth down here on the half day, they just won't do
It's
that.
the energy that one goes and they all follow that.
Yeah, yeah.
So state has a prohibition on unlighted crosswalks though.
Yeah, I mean, and also I always hear the issue in Terrafil on Elm Street at the three-way stop sign, that crosswalk is also an issue because
Yep.
right when cars gain momentum, the crosswalk is right there. So I think just crosswalks in
yeah,
general
you're right.
are
I'm
Yeah,
both
more
being-
specific.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm biased towards this one is because we actually had 2 people hit here.
Yeah,
Actually,
exactly.
Scary,
After
exactly.
a loud bell
Yeah.
here.
Well, and there's, I don't think there's a danger, I don't think there's a danger in prior, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so everybody, I think many people rightly so have a, we've talked about it, a point of concern maybe in their neighborhood, whichever, but we're certain that things are gonna get force ranked if the traffic going across here is 10x what it was 20 years ago.
Correct.
That's,
Uh-huh.
and we have money, we address that one first versus the one in my neighborhood, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it. I'm saying me, just rhetorically.
Got it, rhetorically. So can I
I
add on
do
to
have a
this
coastal
topic
stop
here? Oh, so I'm just making this point here because I find it a really serious safety issue. And it may be addressed in the facilities. But the lighting outside of the police department and town hall is dangerous. Coming out of there at night, I have to use my phone. I've walked out with other people who can't see. And I don't know if there's any intermediary fix that we could have out there.
It's not in the facilities plan, is
It might, well, I'm saying it
No,
might
I-
be, but I'm saying that's not gonna happen this year.
I think I can answer that question as well. So part of the town hall parking lot improvements and realignment was also supposed to include lighting, which again, that project was terribly underfunded. So what Jeff, our town engineer, has been working very hard at is because again, that wasn't a sufficient amount of money to proceed with the whole project. So we've been looking to see, because lighting is an issue, so we've been looking to see, and we've been bidding different options to see if that we could at least move forward with the lighting component of the project. So that would sort of be a baby step to get to the larger project, again, because we do have some funding, it's not sufficient, it's not gonna be enough, like I said, to do the restructuring, but what we have left may be sufficient to do the lighting work. So that was part of that planned project, and it is something we're working on.
Would that lighting work though have value in the future project though?
Right, we would only
Yeah.
do the pieces
Yeah.
that we know would, so for example, some of the locations Wendy just described, like in front of, town hall building, there's certain locations that the lighting is going to it would be okay, right? Because we're not gonna wanna put something in that we're just gonna tear up.
But that's a conversation we have with the ARPA stuff. You do the HVAC this year when it's out 10 years, and then you're gonna rip it out in 10 years. But the lighting is, to me, it's an immediate, even a temporary need, regardless of, like, just, it's dangerous out there. And I don't wanna be the first selectman to break a hip.
Or Amber.
No,
Say that again?
To realign, to the original scope, which was to realign and light. We were talking about $500,000 bucks.
No, I'm not sure if I have that number off the top of my head, but I wanna say the number to redo the lower parking lot with lighting, repavement, realignment, it was, I wanna say more around 900,000 total.
That's a lot of aggregate. Really?
Yes, but I can
Because
give
we
you all
can
a
pave,
specific number.
we can pave almost 16 miles of road for $1.2 million in aggregate, so
You
why?
know, is there some sort of, probably a huge upcharge cost in whatever they designed for
You're
scale,
moving the damn driveway
landscaping,
20 feet.
you know.
It's also, right, so it's labor, materials, and again, it was the lighting component, it's the paving component, as well as the realignment, landscaping,
The
sidewalk.
lights that go in, the lights that
Yeah.
go in.
But I can get you all that exact number, I'm sorry, I just don't
It
have it
just,
off the
that
top of
seems,
my head,
because we
but
can
I can
pave,
get
we
you
can
the
pave 16
exact
miles of
number.
road for $1.2 million. So that,
Right, because this is a little more than just paving, there's a paving piece.
I get it, but that's generally the most expensive piece of the project these days, is the asphalt.
Right, but we also too, again, just, so think about it.
Can't
It's
force
the
it out of you.
crosswalk, it's the crosswalk, it's the sidewalk, it's the parking lot paving, it's lighting.
Turn you
it's
upside down and
realignment.
shake you. Get it out of you.
Everything
I
costs
say
money.
it's a Tom Roy project. The paving.
That's one place. I mean, Tom Roy could get that done for $500,000.
So, yeah, one of the options we have looked at can we do some of the pieces ourselves, kind of function
Yeah,
as our
just like we
PC?
did
I mean, we have
The
looked at
Culver's
this.
Brook, it's beautiful.
Yes,
That's the
I know.
nicest,
Culvert
that's
is
the nicest
gorgeous.
swale and culvert in Connecticut.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, we've really looked at so many different options for this project to try to make the best of the dollars that were allocated. Again, the problem was unfortunately that the design and cost estimates weren't done before that original tranche of money was budgeted, and that's kind of the challenge we're running into. But on a short-term basis, Wendy, we are looking at seeing if we can move forward with the lighting at least.
I'll just bring my phone in.
Yeah.
I want to make
High
a point
powered.
saying,
Keep our head there.
that swale is beautiful. Mike
It really is.
Mike Payne is right.
They did a great job.
When you go by, I'm like, oh my gosh, what we were living with for 50 years looking at, it looks so pleasant now.
How much
It's
is
a
that?
good gateway corner.
You know how much you got that done for?
60,000.
60 grand.
I know. That was it.
Yeah, you could redesign a whole swale for 60 grand, it's $900,000
I get
to
it.
move a driveway.
We have
12
an incredible
And we have the
partner.
state road that we're working with.
I know, we have an incredible team.
As government work, my friends.
I know. And again, I apologize, again, the challenge, we do have a lot of challenges because we're on the state road here,
It's-
so.
Yeah, I know, you forget, people don't, I didn't realize that until I came into office,
Yeah.
that it wasn't under our purview, so.
Anything with the root is not ours.
Yeah, I know, I realize that
Oh, I
now.
know you do.
I do,
At home,
we all, yeah, the people at home.
anything that's a root is not ours.
Oh,
I know, my husband didn't know that.
All right, so Parks and Recreation.
Well, are we done with, so health and, can we use health and well-being to
Take
come
it
back?
off this point.
Well, there's a lot of health and well-being issues. Well, some of the, so, I'm gonna go back, as I was starting on Parks and Rec, which also ties into health and well-being, right? And I think it's led into the continuation of the bike trails. I recently was in a conversation with Tom, Roy, and Hampton and some other people about how to get through Terriffill, right? That's a big thing. The Bloomfield piece is there. Tom Roy had some follow-ups on that because he was going to talk to CROG as a project, or I think it's CROG that has a project going that they funded and they're doing all the design and they're stopping with Bloomfield. So we're not part of that. He was going to look into seeing if we could be part of that study because then it would pay for the design. And our issues are the design getting from Curtis, really, Curtis all the way through. So I don't know where that is, but that, it just ties into parks and economic development and things like that. I just saying that out there because I think getting the trails finalized and connected is a priority for, at least for me.
I fully agree.
That
So-
is for me as well, a definite priority. I'd love to see that bike path get connected through Terriffill. You know, I think that it's a great way to tie that part of the community into the rest of our community. I think it could possibly be an opportunity to bring more business into the Terriffill Village area
Tourism too.
and tourism. So you know, that's definitely a priority that I have as well.
This is my naive take, does a sidewalk count, can part of a municipal sidewalk count towards, so when the 315 sidewalk project, which is not our project, correct, what's going on right now? It is ours?
So the grant that we received, it will be our project, the sidewalk that's going to go in from the corner of 315 and Hoskins up to essentially where the DOT state highway garage is, all along Colorado.
Yeah.
That will be our infrastructure,
Okay.
but we do have a state grant that is fully paying for the construction.
All right, so up in Terriffill though, the replacement of the sidewalk that goes from the top down to the, does that
That's
part,
not gonna be the bike
it
path.
can't count as part of a bike path though, is that?
I don't know if it can, but it's not in the plan
Okay,
that
just
I've
asking
been
for
part of.
connectivity purposes.
Sure, so there's different standards for sort of a sidewalk versus a bike path, and, you know, with Terrible, one of the challenges we have is a little more tight. So, for example, that sidewalk is more of a traditional sidewalk, somebody could certainly ride a bike on it, but typically, a multi-use path, I believe is, gosh, I'm really testing my memory here, I think it's 8 feet wide, is traditionally, again, a more multi-use path, which would be something more similar.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is it,
What you see connected to like the high school and what you see on
Right,
Owens Brook
exactly.
versus
Yeah,
what you see right out here in front of Town Hall.
that way?
Those are the
Yeah, I'm
differences.
just, so then where is it, I guess, we're getting off track, but is it a priority? So up in the heights of Terriffill, where is the,
The path?
yes?
So the path, should care if I should go?
No.
So, first of all, I wanted to ask for an update on the whole easement Antonio property bike path, because I don't know if we've heard that, right?
It's closed and
Oh, so it's, well, okay, so that was one piece, right?
Yeah.
Then the next piece is to get from Curtis, that goes to Curtis, correct?
correct.
The next piece, the big piece is Curtis to Terriffill.
Up the hill,
And there's multiple, the reason it's been delayed is because there's multiple schools of thought. One person's school of thought is to go up Quarry, which I think is insane. I'm gonna editorialize here, I think that's insane, because it's crazy, that road. Another school of thought was to go along the river and create a tourist type bike path, but we do have flooding issues, but a beautiful path along the river. And then the last iteration I heard was a compromise to see if we could go through Governor's Bridge, through to Terriffill Park, I believe, to Terriffill Center, and then you're gonna connect to that Bloomfield piece, which is in the final stages or we're done. And then you bring tourism to Terriffill, you bring ability for businesses there. Another item I have on here is Terriffill Park, because that is a gorgeous park if it's revitalized. And there you go, you're giving Terriffill a lot of credibility, as part of this, the
just for
the
clarity, the part through Governor's Bridge, you're not creating,
I
you're not,
think
you're
it's
not
on-
putting paving through there, you're usually
I think
utilizing
so.
some of their paving.
As a temporary,
And
yes.
You exit and then you re-enter at the other end.
It was defined as a temporary, because to get to the river thing could take 10 years to build a boardwalk and
Sure.
all this kind of
But then
stuff,
you're talking significant future
costs.
costs.
Yeah,
Army Corps of
yeah.
Engineer permits.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, lots of money, but maybe there's, I can't remember, like, there might be grants or funding, maybe ARPA, like, if you, again, this is a maybe ARPA. No, I know you're gonna say no, but if somewhere in January they come out and say you can use it for town recovery because of the impact to people's mental health, and you can use it for a town thing, like, those
For
are
a
the
town
main.
So
Maybe experience
going to
revenue
the,
loss,
so
yes.
just
Yeah.
another jump forward, the capital, you put up the capital improvement T-Ville Park, remember, that's in the Parks and Rec master plan.
And when is it planned for, I guess? Oh, yes, when
No,
is, do we know
What
when
is,
that?
well, there's the plan for it, but there's no dollar placed.
Okay, so we're putting it, if we agree, it could be a prioritization during our capital.
Right, and potentially shifting. So, just a couple of quick things,
Yeah.
so maybe just going back up to this piece. So, in terms of the Terriffill gap, we do have the Bloomfield to Terriffill connector. That should be under construction this coming spring, so those documents will be out to bid most likely over the winter. That is a fully funded project, it's fully permitted, so that one is that, again, that next leg that's being constructed. The one that was mentioned that's downtown to Curtis Park, the design is nearly complete. I think we're at about 95% completion. And we do have the easement secured, which is great. There is one challenge that we're waiting for. So the funding for that project was in anticipation of future federal funding coming out of essentially federal infrastructure dollars under what they call the Transportation Alternatives Program. We do believe that program is hopefully likely to be funded through some of this infrastructure money that's now coming and flowing through. So we're on the list for that project to be funded, but we don't technically have the funding yet. And then as you mentioned, it's sort of that gap in between that's it's a very complicated issue to deal with because of the proximity to the river and wetlands issues, et cetera. So that's the challenge with that piece, but it is definitely a high priority. For the Terriffill Park capital improvements, as Chris mentioned, we do have a number of items in the capital and CNR plan for the next 6 years. The pavilion there needs a lot of work. You may recall we're funding smaller scale playscapes a little bit at a time, so after 2 years we can replace one. With the Terriffill Park, we're halfway there to fund the playground replacement at that park. But there are some additional improvements on there. As you recall, the tennis courts we flagged for you, they are really beyond repair at this point, but there's such a demand for pickleball. We've identified that as a potential conversion opportunity to take out the tennis court infrastructure but replace it with pickleball infrastructure. That's in that plan. So what we can also do, if this becomes a priority for the board, is again look at shifting around potential projects if you want to maybe, ultimately if we decide to shift up some of those things that are in out years and push out other items. Another challenge we've been having down at Terriffill Park is illegal dumping, which is really unfortunate, but it is somewhat isolated. And we have had consistent illegal dumping of large-scale items that are bulk items that we then have to take and pay for at the transfer station. So there are some just other sort of practical aspects of security at the park, and we certainly want access to the park and access to the river, but we do have some people with the current layout of the park who have been misusing and abusing it. So that's something else that is more of a recent issue that Orlando and Tom and I have been working on.
That's ebbs and flows for decades.
But if you improve it and make it something where people are biking through there or something like that,
There's a
it's
different
gonna be less
option.
of a dead end.
You increase the
Right.
visibility.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
Just to frame, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but we're gonna potentially pay $1.5 million from Route 10 to Curtis, right? Was that a half mile? It's about a half mile.
Yeah, so I was
So
trying to
just-
think which one.
Just think about that though. It's $1.5 million to connect that
Yeah.
half mile. So think about the scope, and I'm not suggesting, I still think it's really important, but how much it's gonna cost us to get the bike path up to Terriffill.
I might have the number somewhere in a note. If I find it, I'll
But
send it
It's a
out.
big-
It
it's
was
a big
a
number.
lot.
I'm sorry, so I thought you were
16
alluding
million?
to that there is a potential for, within the infrastructure bill, to find funding
Yeah,
for
that's
alternative
that's
transportation.
That's for Curtis Park,
That's the
So why isn't the
Oh, no,
whole, why isn't the whole thing not?
because all we're ready to go on the design for is the Curtis Park one. But we haven't designed and figured out the route for the other one yet.
So, yeah, I think
Yeah.
So you might recall a few years ago, the board authorized us to submit a grant application.
Of course, I
to
remember,
ROG.
part of the- yeah.
Yes, exactly, good memory, and that was for the Transportation Alternatives Program, to get us essentially on the waiting list. And for that particular grant program, at the time with what we were able to apply for, it was, again, downtown to Curtis Park. And again, that's the one that we're on the waiting list for at the moment, that we think will be hopefully in the federal funding that's going to be released.
Remember, was that for design, for actual work or a
For the
design
actual, construction
of
of
the
it.
piece to Curtis? I
To
missed.
Curtis.
Okay.
Right.
My
So
point is
essentially,
it's
we're on a
really
waiting list
expensive.
for funding.
Say that again?
It's really expensive.
Yeah. I was,
That's my point, is these, again, these are really, really important, but they are not cheap to design and then execute.
well, and that's the point where I want to follow up with that email on Tom, is that there is a design group, $421 million? Does that sound insane? For the whole Hartford, Eastern Connecticut group for their design, but that's probably wrong, how 400,000, sorry, 100,000 to do the design, right?
For
We
the
have to do
Greenway?
our- For the East Coast Greenway, yes.
Yeah.
And so, again, this is me trying to remember, it stopped there in Bloomfield.
Mhm.
Tom was gonna call to see, we were gonna just see if there were any way we could be part of that design effort.
No, that'd be huge, that would save us money.
So that we wouldn't have to pay for the design.
right.
Because a lot of the things too, they were talking about, and I don't know if they were talking about the big infrastructure bill or another like the Biden infrastructure, or whatever, or the other infrastructure. Whereas if you were ready to go with on paper with a plan, you could be you would get funding for it. But if we're not what's the word, shovel ready, then we won't be able to get in there. So just a lot of battling about that, but there's a lot of things going on there, I think.
No, but your point is right, and the challenge with this is how do we organize it, right? Because we got the grant funding and the approval, 6 years ago for Bloomfield? It was a long,
It was prior to
long-
me coming, some of the approvals,
I
yeah.
think you might have just gotten here for that one. That was that's $1 million+ of grants just to do that half mile or whatever it is. Because there's a ton of engineering because of where it is. We just closed on the easement. So the reason we didn't design the rest of this is because you gotta do those other pieces first. So now is the time, and it's unfortunate that we're behind the 8 ball, but we're behind the 8 ball intentionally because it could have been throwaway dollars to invest in the design until we'd secured the easement, because we had to find a way to get across the river, right? Because we had no way to get across the river was the original. So now that we're across the river, we can focus on the next piece, but now we got to catch up to see if we can hit the federal dollars to get it.
Well, I
Because
think that would be great if we could be a part of that, and then also
Yeah.
looking at the different potential ways of getting through there and what each one would cost and what the upkeep cost would be, and just to be able to take a look at those and come up with a real plan and get it beyond just an idea.
I agree.
And I know that Hampton's been involved in the conversations and I mean, their T-Ville Village, they're all pushing to move this forward. So there's people, like, it could be like a cell phone, different people in different areas,
Yeah.
but it might not work.
I think this
It
is
might not
game
work.
changing for Terrifil.
And us, it's like kids can ride their bike, somebody said you can ride your bike to a game at Curtis
Yeah.
or Memorial from Terrifil, you're a kid and you can't.
And over the last 20 years, we have prioritized this from the south end of town all the way up until this point, and we shouldn't stop.
Yeah.
We've
yeah.
everybody in this community has benefited. It's not, oh, we're just gonna spend the money on Terrifil. No. We've spent the money on everybody in this community, and Terrifil's not the way the longest.
Yeah.
So it's, to me, it's a continuum of a 20-year investment.
And we could do our bike trip through
We could ride the
That'd be
library
fun.
bike up.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I really wanna do the library.
I wanna ride that library bike.
You would have to ride it on quarry and get killed.
I'm not getting on that.
I want to see that.
I think it's an electric bike, right?
It is, but
It is.
still.
All right.
I would hope so for what it costs.
Right.
Yeah, 6,000 they
It
said.
was a lot of money.
Well, I said, well, we have to
But-
see what else.
It came through a grant,
It
right?
did.
Yeah, it was our ARPA money.
Yeah.
So, I want to, so we're,
Unless I'm-
anybody, well, I was going to ask a question until Chris comes back on
We
the.
have 4 minutes left.
All right, so we're going to stop at noon.
Yeah.
You want to do, okay, so let's
Yeah.
stop at noon
I have
and
to.
let's stop, you want to just wait till Chris comes back and stop here rather than go into more
Just
items?
make sure that we circle back to Parks and Rec.
Yes, because I was gonna bring up the
Yeah.
splash
Yeah.
pad, the disc golf, and unless you wanna go through those 3 items to talk about.
Well, that's fine, because I was actually gonna throw a bone to Sean and not put a splash pad on the.
It's already on here.
priority list.
Oh, the splash pad.
You take it off.
Came in at the right time,
All I
yes.
know is I got my
Yes.
disc golf course before you got
You
your
did.
splash
I
pad, so
know.
I'm happy.
But I think the splash pad's gonna happen regardless, because it's the more cost-effective alternative to a swimming pool.
I agree. The private sector took care of me on this, on the golf course, disc golf course.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
gone, they did that already.
They did?
We don't-
Yeah.
it's private.
Exactly. You can go, I encourage you to, it's only $5 to
I
go
wanna
around.
try it, not now.
If you want to go, I'll take you.
They put a new sign up,
That's coming.
I'm like, yeah, we're not
That's-
gonna.
We need more, we need more time.
We need,
Oh,
we'll have
okay.
to table
like it, they got
that,
some beer up there.
right?
I'm a
but
terrible
I
That's why I
just-
said I want to circle
I'm not
back
very
to
good at
Parks.
Oh, there's just beers.
Oh, I think we should have a, Board of Selectmen,
I would love, I would
disc
encourage
challenge.
myself around for anybody, it's, I have all the discs.
So,
You do, you're gonna be,
40 discs.
oh, alright, so I wanna, alright, so, we need to come back to Parks and Rec, and wellness and quality of life and health, right? In all those, yeah, got it, and infrastructure, and I do wanna add another sheet. I'd like a sheet up here for, I gotta find my sheet, transparency and communication, like, because we've been talking about access to data and the website, having to find things in the minutes, and just to talk about that generally speaking, if there's any way we can improve that. A couple things before we close that I wrote down. So we want to try to do this again, and hopefully we can recapture the freewheeling momentum that we have here today, because I think this is really great, and we don't get an opportunity to just talk, which is really sad. We have to always be following Robert's rules and being, following all the laws and procedures for being on a board, right? And this is one of our opportunities where we can actually think out loud together without judgment. So that's the one thing that I love about this. But I do want to present an option that one of our board members has suggested for our December 20th meeting, and that was, it wasn't me, to do a Secret Santa or something like that as a fun holiday item. I don't know, is anybody interested in doing that? You look like you're a no. I knew you were a no.
I tried to escape corporate insurance to get away from Secret Santa, so I thought I'd take.
Okay, I just,
No,
For
it's
each
okay.
other?
yes,
Yeah, for,
Okay.
like I could think of some gifts for some people in
that's
this
fine,
room.
I know.
I can't imagine what those
No, so you're saying now or yes?
If it's something, I participate, I'm supporting anybody.
Okay, would everybody like to do that? I credit Amber for that thought.
Let's do it.
So we'll have to pick,
So who's
somebody will
So
have,
you get to send out the rules, please.
I will send out
Yeah.
the rules.
I think somebody not on the board should.
Do you want me to throw all your names in a hat?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I want you to send out rules too, make sure we don't.
Of course, because I like spending $50,
you're
my
gonna be-
family,
No more
it's
than-
cheap.
No more than $20.
Make sure it
Whatever
doesn't,
is.
that's the
No
whole thing,
alcohol.
get your method, yeah, exactly.
Okay, is
Yes,
that what you
alcohol,
want to do?
alcohol.
It
We'll
devolves.
draw names, but I think maybe the rest of it will leave.
Up to us? Okay,
Right.
but are you
Is
guys
this-
included in the drawing of the names?
Yeah, we-
No, then
oh,
it- how big is it?
Then we gotta make sure we check it with the gift policy.
You
Yeah.
see the gift
So
bag.
it's just the six?
Include us, so probably just the 6 of you, but
Yeah,
we could draw
okay.
names for you guys.
Okay.
We'll need an ethics opinion.
Joan's gonna have a field day with whatever this is, I guarantee you right now.
Okay.
It was truly meant to like.
I thought it was a-
I love it.
I think it's
We're
great.
gonna draw names right now. I can-
I
Yes,
was
do it now.
serious.
But you can't tell us.
But we don't,
It's secret. Don't
Yeah.
tell us.
What's the, so, all right, so I don't want to keep anybody, but, so we're coming back.
Yes.
We gotta figure out a date to come back. I hate to make people give up another morning, but I think the Saturday morning is kind of a good time because you're done in the afternoon, you can drink a lot of coffee. I know you guys have kids, if we could figure out a way to have your kids come, I think that would be great.
I invited China, she would politely decline.
Right, get it, so, and I'm thinking because of the holiday, we do it, like, one of the dates maybe that we had in early January, that we had at least 5 people that could come. I don't know, you're the probably.
wasn't paying attention, what were you saying?
Thank you for your courtesy.
I'm rather than buy, I'm telling you without.
I love it. So that we're gonna get together again
Yes.
after the holidays, right? Mull this
Continue
over, do research, see where we are here, and then bring it back again and do another informal session like this. So, on the Saturday morning, and if you, I think that would be great. I think this has been one of the better things I've done as a board member.
Good.
Um,
So I believe it tossed around January 8th, but unfortunately, I don't know if folks are planning on attending this. CCM had just announced it
Right.
yesterday.
Oh, is that where you're
Yeah,
going?
that's the conference.
Which happens to be that same day. So if board members aren't planning on attending that, I do believe January 8th worked for, I think, 4 people, not a majority of people.
Does not work.
I think it was only 4 though, so maybe that weekend after, but we can send around some dates. And again, maybe if we can't do a weekend, maybe even if it's something, in January in that like 4 to 6 time frame.
I love that.
I would
Yeah.
love to explore that option.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we can try to find
Can we
something like
just-
4 to
yeah.
6,
Okay.
It's weekends,
Okay.
I mean, the 15th is somebody's birthday, so we could do it then.
It's also a long weekend.
It is holiday weekend.
yeah, that's a lot, that's.
The 8th is
But I don't wanna, we can't let it go too far because we need to do this before the budget. That's the only,
It's definitely helpful.
so let's, if we can find a date. I like the 4 to 6, that's fine,
Yeah.
that's fine. And hopefully that we have the same mental state as we do in the morning on a Saturday, in our casual dress.
Yeah, we can try to keep it, again, informal, just for conversation.
And I don't actually think that there is any bylaws that require us to dress a certain way, other than proper decorum, so I don't need to,
I was the one who got jeans at my Optum office.
Yeah, but I'm saying, you open up the meeting and explain to the public, we actually don't have a dress code.
Okay. All right, I was just trying to let
It's our
everybody know
on-camera
why I
persona,
look
Chris.
sloppy today. But I don't have on, I have on my secret.
Are we adjourned?
So is
We're
there-
waiting for our names. You have to go though, but we're waiting for our
Yeah.
names from
Special
Melissa.
meetings.
And let's just set the price range here.
Yeah, but I need like a whole sheet.
I'll
of
give
what
you a
we're
sheet,
doing,
but I wanna,
okay?
okay, let's just consensus on the price range because that's the critical.
Do we have a town policy? I know we're not
It has to be
employees.
under
$30?
I would just say keep it under 50.
Oh, good, I like
Oh.
50.
I need to up my game, man, I'm just thinking.
Well, that's the town policy.
Alright, so I'm gonna shoot for like the $35 range. How does that sound?
That's a weird number.
I know, I don't usually say it, but people say it.
I move $20.
We could
Alright,
put it at our
we-
January, our next January brainstorming meeting.
make sure you
and
read
read it.
How about this, no less than 20, no more than
I did.
35?
I did.
I like that. 20 to 35.
Yeah.
Just keep it out.
No, but
It's
it's
not
not.
funny, but.
But for now, you.
I haven't done that in a long time.
Dude, that was painful.
Okay.
Well, it's just like
Ooh, I got a good one.
Right,
Secret.
I love my.
I get it, it's in the name.
And no, so $35,
Or
20 to
Sean
35.
suggested like 20 to.
No less than
I-
20,
yeah, don't be cheap.
no cheapos.
We've got fiscal
Exactly.
conservatives and we have
If I wanna-
progressive liberals, we gotta make everybody
If I see
happy.
something I wanna buy that's for $50, I can do it, but I won't, I'll just say it was 35.
Did you get yourself there?
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have to put it in executive session?
You seem happy.
I don't think we can.
I got a good one.
Okay. Okay, let me know.
I don't think that counts.
Alright. Alright, go.
I'll look it up.
Oh, maybe, anybody wanna make a motion
No,
to
I need
adjourn?
to
So
make sure you
moved.
get yourself.
Anybody want a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Yeah, I just
All right.
want to say that Sean.
Sorry,
needs-
I'm